There's something about rainy nights that makes everything feel more still, more vulnerable. When the wind howls through the trees and the rain taps against your window, you're not sure if it's just weather or something watching you. These are real stories from people who were alone during a storm, and not all of them made it through the night. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and whatever you do, don't look outside. Welcome to over 2 hours of terrifying rainy night horror stories. I first met in person with Mary E. in the summer of 2007. I had arranged with her husband of 15 years, Terrence, to see her for an interview. Mary had initially agreed, since I was not a newsman but rather an amateur writer, gathering information for a few early college assignments, and if all went according to plan, some pieces of fiction. We scheduled the interview for a particular weekend when I was in Chicago on unrelated business, but at the last moment Mary changed her mind and locked herself in the couple's bedroom, refusing to meet with me. For half an hour I sat with Terrence as we camped outside the bathroom door, listening and taking notes while he attempted fruitlessly to calm his wife. The things Mary said made little sense but fit with the pattern I was expecting. Though I could not see her, I could tell from her voice that she was crying, and more often than not, her objections to speaking with me centered around an incoherent diatribe on her dreams, her nightmares. Terrence apologized profusely when we ceased the exercise, and I did my best to take it in stride. Recall that I wasn't a reporter in search of a story, but merely a curious young man in search of information. Besides, I thought at the time I could perhaps find another similar case if I put my mind and resources to it. Mary was the system operator for a small Chicago-based bulletin board system in 1992 when she first encountered Smile JPEG. And her life changed forever. She and Terrence had been married for only 5 months. Mary was one of an estimated 400 people who saw the image when it was posted as a hyperlink on the BBS, though she is the only one who has spoken openly about the experience. The rest have remained anonymous, or are perhaps dead. In 2005, when I was only in 10th grade, Smile.jpg was first brought to my attention by the burgeoning interest in web-based phenomenon. Mary was the most often cited victim of what is sometimes referred to as Smile Dog. The being Smile.jpg is reputed to display. What caught my interest? Other than the obvious macabre elements of the cyber legend and my proclivity towards such things, was the sheer lack of information, usually to the point that people don't believe it even exists other than as a rumor or hoax. It is unique because though the entire phenomenon centers on a picture file, that file is nowhere to be found on the internet. Certainly, many photo-manipulated simulacra litter the web, showing up with the most frequency on sites such as the image board 4chan, particularly the LXL-focused paranormal subboard. It is suspected these are fakes because they do not have the effect the true Smile.jpg is believed to have, namely sudden onset temporal lobe epilepsy and acute anxiety. The purported reaction in the viewer is one of the reasons the phantom-like Smile JPEG is regarded with such disdain, since it is patently absurd. Though depending on whom you ask, the reluctance to acknowledge Smile.jpg's existence might be just as much out of fear as it is out of disbelief. Neither Smile.jpg nor Smile.dog is mentioned anywhere on Wikipedia. Any attempt to create a page pertaining to Smile.jpg is deleted by any of the encyclopedia's many admins. Encounters with Smile.jpg are the stuff of internet legend. Mary E's story is not unique. There are unverified rumors of Smile.jpg showing up in the early days of Usenet, and even one persistent tale that in 2002 a hacker flooded the forums of humor and satire website Something Awful with a deluge of Smile.dog pictures, rendering almost half the forum's users at the time epileptic. It is also said that in the mid to late 90s that Smile.jpg circulated on Usenet and as an attachment of a chain email with the subject line Smile, God loves you. Yet, despite the huge exposure these stunts would generate, there are very few people who admit to having experienced any of them, and no trace of the file or any link has ever been discovered. Those who claim to have seen Smile.jpg often joke that they were far too busy to save a copy of the picture to their hard drive. However, all alleged victims offer the same description of the photo. A dog-like creature, usually described as appearing similar to a Siberian husky, illuminated by the flash of the camera, sits in a dim room, the only background detail that is visible being a human hand extending from the darkness near the left side of the frame. The hand is empty, but is usually described as beckoning. Of course, most attention is given to the dog or dog creature, as some victims are more certain than others about what they claim to have seen. The muzzle of the beast is reputedly split in a wide grin, revealing 2 rows of very white, very straight, very sharp, very human-looking teeth. This is, of course, not a description given immediately after viewing the picture, but rather a recollection of victims who claim to have seen the picture endlessly repeated in their mind's eye during the time they are, in reality, having epileptic fits. These fits are reported to continue indeterminately, often while the victims sleep, resulting in very vivid and disturbing nightmares. These may be treated with medication, some being more effective than others. Mary, I assume, was not on effective medication. That was why, after my visit to her apartment in 2007, I sent out feelers to several folklore and urban legend-oriented news groups, websites, and mailing lists, hoping to find the name of a supposed victim of Smile.jpg who felt more interested in talking about his experiences. For a time, nothing happened. And at length I forgot completely about my pursuits, since I had begun my freshman year of college and was quite busy. Mary contacted me via email, however, near the beginning of March 2008. This is Mary's email. Dear Mr. L, I am incredibly sorry about my behavior last summer when you came to interview me. I hope you understand that it was no fault of yours, but rather my own problems that led me to act out as I did. I realized that I could have handled the situation more decorously. However, I hope you will forgive me. At the time, I was afraid. You see, for 15 years I have been haunted by Smile.jpg. A smile dog comes to me in my sleep every night. I know that sounds silly, but it's true. There is an ineffable quality about my dreams, my nightmares, that makes them completely unlike any real dreams I have ever had. I don't move, and I don't speak. I simply look ahead, and the only thing ahead of me is the scene from that horrible picture. I see the beckoning hand, and I see Smile Dog. It talks to me. It is not a dog, of course, though I am not quite sure what it really is. It tells me it will leave me alone if only I do as it asks. All I must do, it says, is spread the word. That is how it phrases its demands. And I know exactly what it means. It wants me to show it to someone else. And I could. The week after my incident, I received in the mail a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was only a 3.5-inch floppy disk. Without having to check, I knew precisely what was on it. I thought for a long time about my options. I could show it to a stranger, a coworker. I could even show it to Terrence, as much as the idea disgusted me. And what would happen then? Well, if Smile Dog kept its word, I could sleep. Yet if it lied, what would it do? And who was to say something worse would not come for me if I did as the creature asked? So I did nothing for 15 years, though I kept the diskette hidden amongst my things. Every night for 15 years, Smile Dog has come to me in my sleep and demanded that I spread the word. For 15 years I have stood strong, though there have been hard times. Many of my fellow victims on the BBS board where I first encountered Smile.jpg stopped posting. I heard some of them committed suicide. Others remained completely silent, simply disappearing off the face of the web. They're the ones I worry about the most. I sincerely hope you will forgive me, mister. Oh, but last summer when you contacted me and my husband about an interview, I was near the breaking point. I decided I was going to give you the floppy disk. I didn't care if Smile Dog was lying or not. I wanted it to end. You were a stranger, someone I had no connection with. And I thought I wouldn't feel sorrow when you took the disk as part of your research and sealed your fate. Before you arrived, I realized what I was doing. I was plotting to ruin your life. I couldn't stand the thought, and in fact I still cannot. I am ashamed, mister. Hell, and I hope that this warning will dissuade you from further investigation of Smile.jpg. You may in time encounter someone who is, if not weaker than I, then wholly more depraved. Someone who will not hesitate to follow Smile Dog's orders. Stop while you are still whole. Sincerely, Marielle. Terrence contacted me later that month with the news that his wife had killed herself. While cleaning up the various things she'd left behind, closing email accounts and the like, he happened upon the above message. He was a man in shambles. He wept as he told me to listen to his wife's advice. He found the disc, he revealed, and burned it until it was nothing but a stinking pile of blackened plastic. The part that most disturbed him, however, was how the disc had hissed as it melted. Like some sort of animal, he said. I will admit that I was a little uncertain about how to respond to this. At first I thought perhaps it was a joke, with a couple belatedly playing with the situation in order to get a rise out of me. A quick check of several Chicago newspapers' online obituaries, however, proved that Mary E. was indeed dead. There was, of course, no mention of suicide in the article. I decided that for a time at least, I would not further pursue the subject of Smile.jpg, especially since I had finals coming up at the end of May. But the world has odd ways of testing us. Almost a year after I'd returned from my disastrous interview with Mary E., I received another email. Hello. I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you were interested in SmileDoc. I have seen it, and it isn't as bad as everyone says. I've sent it to you here. Just spreading the word. That final line chilled me to the bone. According to my email client, there was only one file attachment, called Naturally, Smile.jpg. I considered downloading it for some time. It was most likely a fake, I imagine. And even if it weren't, I was never wholly convinced of Smile.jpg's peculiar powers. Mary E.'s account had shaken me. Yes, but she was probably mentally unbalanced anyway. After all, how could a simple image do what Smile.jpg was said to accomplish? What sort of creature was it that could break one's mind with only the power of the eye? And if such things were patently absurd, then why did the legend exist at all? If I downloaded the image, if I looked at it, and if Mary turned out to be correct, if SmileDog came to me in my dreams, demanding I spread the word, what would I do? Would I live my life as Mary had, fighting against the urge to give in until I died? Or would I simply spread the word, eager to be put to rest? And if I chose the latter route, how could I do it? Whom would I burden in turn? If I went through with my earlier intention to write a short article about Smile.jpg, I decided I could attach it as evidence. And anyone who read the article, anyone who took interest, would be affected. And even assuming the Smile.jpg attached to the email was genuine, would I be capricious enough to save myself in that manner? Could I spread the word? Yes. Yes, I could. Nobody knows what rock bottom truly is until they've hit it. Being abruptly fired from a job you've worked at for the past 10 years, and then catching your girl cheating on you with your replacement really makes a man think. Hell, my student loans aren't even paid off yet. What a shit show this life is. After a rather boozy night that consisted of sending out about 4 dozen resumes and horrendously written cover letters, I passed out. When I woke up the next morning, I decided to at least try and make some money at home while waiting for an interview. At that moment, I thought that the best way to go about it was completing those internet surveys that yielded $5 Subway gift cards and other shit like that after about an hour of answering questions. I mean, I didn't have any other marketable skills that could have yielded immediate income. It was either that or wasting a day away playing computer games. At least I wouldn't have to pay for food. I did these surveys for about 5 hours before nearly passing out. It was way more excruciating than I had originally anticipated. At the end of those 5 hours, I'd accumulated about $45 in cash and gift cards. $9 an hour. Not like I was making much more than that before. I was about to close my laptop up for the day and head to a bar in an attempt to drown out my melancholy when I first saw it. It shouldn't even have been noticeable, but for one reason or another, it was. At the bottom corner of the website that I was on existed a tiny, singular advertisement. Maybe it was the simplicity that got me. Plain black letters in a tacky font that read surveys for cash overlapped a completely white background. At least they were direct with a message. One more couldn't hurt, I thought. Might as well scrape together a little bit more booze money before heading out. I sat back down, clicked on the picture link, and prepared myself to grind through some more painstaking inquiries. The first few questions were simple enough. I guess they weren't really questions, but more data collection. My name, age, and occupation. I thought it was kind of weird that they also asked my height and weight, but it wasn't unheard of. The first real question was a different story, though. I must have stared at it, eyes wide and mouth agape, for God knows how long. What the actual hell? In plain English, this is what popped up on my screen. How strong is your urge to currently look behind you? There were 5 options below, ranging from not at all to overwhelming. There was no feasible reason why I should have been afraid at that moment, but I was. I tightened my breathing, trying to make out any subtle noises behind me. There were none. After maybe about 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to look. There was nothing. I sighed in relief and scoffed at myself at the same time. This must have been some kind of joke. However, I decided to entertain it, answering neutral and clicking on to the next question. This is what I read. Why would you look behind you? I smirked. Funny. Before simply typing in I don't know in the response box and once again clicking next. This was the third question. You're on a plane. Apart from you, there is only one passenger who is sitting somewhere behind you. At some point, you get up to go to the washroom and find that the man is gone. You check to see if he's in the only bathroom on the plane, but he isn't. What do? Again, I must have stupidly stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Was this some kind of obscure personality test? I mean, it must have been, right? Right, I put the same answer that I used for the last question. I don't know. It was true. I didn't know. How was I supposed to answer this shit? I clicked next again, now more intrigued than anything. The fourth question went like this. You wake up in woods unfamiliar to you. It's nighttime, and the moonlight provides you with only slight visibility. About 30 feet away from you, there is a small, dimly illuminated cabin. The door is open, and a smiling woman is motioning for you to come in. Do you go? Explain why. The question wasn't necessarily weirder than the last one. So my conjecture that this was some kind of odd personality test was still feasible. I actually made an attempt to answer this one. Something along the lines of going into the cabin because there's simply nowhere else to go. Once again, I clicked next. Probably shouldn't have. The questions started getting really messed up. They weren't too gory or explicit, not anything like that. Were just stranger, weirder, more psychologically disturbing. If you're wondering why the hell I kept going, I can't really give you an explicit answer to that. I just felt like I had to. It was an esoteric, creeping sensation that I can't quite explain away. But I could never shake it, so I just went on. Some of the questions that stood out were, suppose that you wake up one night to find an elevator in your house. During every midnight after that, it opens up for 5 minutes, revealing an exact copy of yourself that gets progressively more injured as time goes on. Do you keep living like this? Or do you enter the elevator once and end it all? And you're in a hotel room but are awoken by a rapid knocking at your window. You peek through the blinds, seeing what appears to be a man missing both his eyes. He puts his mouth to the glass and tells you to kill the woman in the bathroom immediately. Do you listen to him? This was one of my least favorites. You are watching home videos with your mother. One of the tapes includes footage of her being murdered by a masked intruder. Your mother simply laughs at this footage without saying anything. In your opinion, is this a cause for concern? In addition to this insanity-inducing shit, there were some rather disconcerting events happening in real life as well. I received a knock at the door about 30 minutes in. I looked through my peephole to find a guy standing there, frantically shaking his head and mouthing no while making direct eye contact with me. He looked terrified. Obviously, I didn't open up. I received about 10 phone calls from somebody named the Auditor on my caller ID. They left a message every time, but each one was just a recording that consisted of somebody saying numbers through heavy static. Actually, it sounded more like screaming, now that I think about it. About an hour into this thing, I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. I was petrified of looking behind me, even though there was no indication that anything should have been there. I heard some soft scratching coming from my vent at one point, so I moved my couch under it. Eventually, I reached what appeared to be the end of the survey. However, it wasn't a question. It was simply a statement. Don't let them in. They're not to be trusted. Almost as if it were on cue, I heard more knocking at my door about 5 seconds after reading this. As slowly and silently as I could, I moved over and looked through the peephole once again. It was a different person than the one I'd seen earlier. She was a woman looking to be in her mid-20s. She was wearing a thick blazer despite it being around 90 Fahrenheit outside. She was also wearing sunglasses, so I could never tell where she was actually looking. She eventually took a piece of paper out of her pocket and slipped it under the door. I read the note. It's lying. Leave your apartment immediately. It's been about half an hour since. I can't bring myself to look at the computer screen nor at the woman outside. She's still there. I can see the shadows of her feet from underneath my door. I heard my bedroom window open a few minutes ago, but I've since jammed the door shut with a chair. I can hear some kind of distorted muttering coming from behind it now. Maybe rock bottom wasn't so bad. But what the hell am I supposed to do here? 12 seems to be the age when kids start putting the heat on their parents about the truth behind Santa. I was certainly no exception to this rule. How were Santa's elves able to make that video game I wanted in their workshop? I thought Nintendo owned Mario. Or how about the ever-infamous visiting every house in one night? Did the Jolly Man own some type of time-extending device? Or perhaps the most obvious question of all, how could he have lived for so long? A lot of people say he trains apprentices who take his place every few decades. Others claim he's just immortal. As for everything else, magic seemed to be the universal lie everyone had agreed on. Whatever the case, I just went with the conclusion that it was my parents doing. Of course, they deny it and claim ignorance if I confronted them, but it wasn't enough to dissuade my beliefs. So one Christmas Eve, when I couldn't sleep, as these questions danced among my dreams of sugar cereals and new games, I decided to investigate the noises coming from my living room. This time, surely, I would catch my dad or mom in the act of stowing presents under the tree. At least then they let me in on the truth. But as I entered the living room, I saw a man before me that I did not recognize. He was dressed in red and white, with a slightly overweight body, and he wore a stringy fake white beard. His hair, or what remained of it, was graying around the edges of his classic Santa hat, and his eyes were wide with fright as he dropped a present under the tree. Being the intuitive youth I was, I came to one of two conclusions. Either this was a home invader stealing my family's gifts, or this was the real Santa. I opened my mouth to scream, but the man rushed towards me and covered my mouth. "Shoo shoo," he said, putting a finger to his mouth, trying to smile. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I was petrified of this man. Then, slowly, he took back his hand and extended it towards me. "It's all right there, little one. You know who I am, right?" I nodded, not shaking his hand back. The trembling man nodded as well, then grabbed an empty sack lying on the floor and gestured to the tree. "Look, see, I bring gifts. Now run along to bed, or I might have to put you on the naughty list. Ho ho ho." He started drifting towards the deeper, hearty voice normally associated with Kris Kringle, but I wasn't fooled. Regardless, I wiped my eyes and began to step back from the living room, trying to create some distance between me and the stranger. The man simply watched, wiped his brow, and proceeded to approach the fireplace. I stopped and observed, confused as to how he was going to leave my house. But a blast of green flames erupted from the chimney, and the man fell back to the floor. I couldn't see his face, but I'm certain it was twisted in fear like my own. A massive, bony hand spawned from the fire, and the arm that followed was draped in ragged fur. Then another arm. And then the skull of some wild creature with two large horns followed, nearly as large as the fireplace itself. The bones popped and snapped as it slammed its hands onto the floor. The entire monster was engulfed in the flame, yet it did not seem to burn anything in the house. "Eddie," the monster declared, speaking to what I guessed to be the man on the floor. "No, I know I did my part, see? 10,000 houses, just like you said, right? 10,000, I did my part. And yet you allowed a human child to see you. You know the rules. Look, I've learned my lesson. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Just let me go, please. I delivered all to let you go." "Did you let that woman go, Eddie? I don't seem to recall you letting her go. This was your second chance, and you've wasted it. What you gonna do?" Then he'd whisper. I could make out his quaking figure being overshadowed by the creature in the fireplace. The next sound to be heard was a crunch with a soft beginning and snapping finish. I jumped as the sound repeated a few times, finally letting out a shaky breath. I prayed in my head that it wasn't what I thought, but when the creature reared its head towards me, I saw the red and white pants hanging from its mouth as it chewed on Eddie's corpse, then watched it slurp up his legs like strands of spaghetti. I covered my eyes and tried to tell myself it wasn't real, and after a quiet minute, I peeked between my fingers to see the monster staring back at me from the fireplace. The pace of my breathing grew quicker and sharper, my eyes unable to escape from the grasp of those empty eye sockets. Now run off back to bed, little one, or else I might put you on the naughty list. My legs finally found the strength to leave, and I sprinted from my parents' room, diving into the sheets with them. There wasn't a trace of the events of the night before. When my family went down to the tree the next morning, there was even a little note next to an empty glass and a half-eaten cookie on the table. "Have a Merry Christmas," signed Santa Claus. As much as I tried to take in the warm, comforting atmosphere that came with Christmas Day, I couldn't stop watching the fireplace, terrified that the monster would return. At least, now I know the truth about Santa Claus. I work at a gas station in rural Pennsylvania. It's a boring job, but it's pretty easy and it pays all right. A few weeks ago, this new guy started. I'll call him Jeremy. Jeremy is weird. He's about 25 or 26, and he hardly speaks, but he's got the creepiest laugh I've ever heard. My boss and I have both noticed this, but it's never been a problem, so there's not much we can do about it. Customers have never complained about him, and he's always done his job fairly well. Up until a few weeks ago, anyway. That's when things started going missing. Employee theft can be a problem in any business that sells consumer goods, and there's only one person working at a time at this gas station. It's a pretty small place. About 2 weeks ago, my boss started noticing that we were short on motor oil. At first, it was a few containers at a time, then entire shelves and boxes from the back room. Pretty soon, entire shipments would be gone the day after we got them. And it would always be right after Jeremy's shifts. My boss has checked the security camera tapes from every single night he worked, but he could never catch him in the act. Jeremy would lock up at closing, then the motor oil would be gone the next day. My boss usually takes the tapes home with him to try and catch Jeremy stealing, but his daughter had a softball game last night, so he asked me to watch the tape for him. He offered to pay me overtime under the table, so obviously I took that offer. There are 3 cameras, so he gave me 3 different tapes to check. I figured it would be a long night, but I'm trying to save up for vacation, so I really needed the money. I took the tapes home, popped them in an old VCR, and sat back. 2 days ago, the last time he worked, Jeremy started at 4 p.m. Everything seemed pretty normal at first. He counted up his drawer, switched off with a girl who was working before him, and waited for a customer. The first person who came in was Miss Templeton. The timestamp on the video read 403, a regular. She picked up her cigarettes and a newspaper and paid with a 20. Nothing unusual there. The next customer was some local guy named Ron. He drives a motorcycle and usually comes in every few days. He filled up his tank, got a bag of beef jerky, paid with his credit card, and then left. Next was some guy with a cowboy hat. I'd never seen him before, but we get plenty of strangers passing through, just like any gas station. He got $40 worth of diesel fuel, paid with a $100 bill, and went on his way. I sat back inside. The only thing more boring than doing this job is watching someone else do it. My boss's offer was enough to keep me watching, though, so I left the tape on. Everything seemed pretty normal. I had a feeling that if Jeremy was stealing motor oil, he knew we were suspicious of him by now. I didn't expect him to be dumb enough to let us catch him on camera. Things stayed boring and routine until about 5 o'clock. 03 misses. Templeton came back in. She must have forgotten something. But she didn't. She bought the same pack of cigarettes as before and the same newspaper. She paid another 20. That's odd, I thought. But then again, she's a little absent-minded. I thought Jeremy should have told her that she already got her smokes, but it's not against the rules to sell somebody the same thing twice. That's when Ron came in again. He bought another tank of gas for his motorcycle again. I later checked the outdoor camera because I thought maybe he had another car he wanted to fill up and the same pack of beef jerky. He paid with the same credit card again. No big deal. I figured this was just a weird coincidence. Templeton is forgetful, and Ron probably owns more than one Harley. That's when a guy in a cowboy hat came back in. I felt a chill run down my spine. Don't get Diesel. Don't get Diesel. I found myself whispering to an empty living room. But he did. He got $40 worth of diesel fuel and paid with another $100 bill. Every move he made was identical to his first visit, right down to the way he scratched his nose before he walked out. Either this guy is rich, owns a lot of trucks, and just moved into town, or something really bizarre was happening. I kept watching. Every customer for the next hour was the same as before. Every single one. I was seriously freaked out, and then at 6:03 ms, Templeton walked back in. She bought her cigarettes and newspaper again and paid with a 20 again. I thought I was going to lose it. I only watched another half hour before I started fast-forwarding through the rest. It was all the same. Every customer would come in at the exact same time, exactly 1 hour apart. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sneaky son of a bitch Jeremy had messed with the tapes. He had run a loop of his first hour of business over and over. That wasn't the case. There are windows around a cash register area that the camera covers, and I watched the sunlight fade as time ran on. Jeremy's routine didn't loop over. He swept, mopped, restocked, and did all his duties exactly how you would expect. But the same customers kept coming in. I was panicking at this point. Something was seriously wrong with what I was seeing, and I had no explanation for it. I skipped ahead to when he locked up and walked out to his car. He hadn't stolen anything, but I kept watching just to make sure. I fast-forwarded one last time to about midnight. At exactly 12:03, out of nowhere, Jeremy's face pops up on camera. I don't mean he moved his head into view. I mean that 1 second the store was empty, the next second his face was all I could see. He wasn't looking at the camera, he was looking at me. I was sure of it. I screamed and fumbled for the remote. By the time I grabbed it, he was gone. One frame he was there. The next he wasn't. My hands were shaking like crazy, but I popped in another tape. The other indoor camera shows the back area by the cash register, and I would be able to see how he got up to put his face in the camera like that. I skipped ahead to 12:03, but there was nothing. I would have been able to see him standing on a chair or something on this tape, but he wasn't there. I didn't see him enter the store at all after he left. It's like he really wasn't there. He doesn't know the security code, and no alarms were triggered that night after he locked up. What I did see, however, was that at 12:03, the motor oil vanished off the shelf. All of it. Same as Jeremy's face. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. I turned the tape off and went to bed, but I didn't get a wink of sleep. My body is exhausted right now, but my mind is racing. That tape was undoubtedly the creepiest, most disturbing thing I've ever seen in my life. I worked for a few hours. My boss asked me to bring the tapes back in and let him know what I found. But really, what the hell am I going to say? Jeremy works the night shift tonight, directly after me, and the plan is for my boss to come in just before I leave and confront him with me, as I'm supposed to be the one who caught him stealing. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I suppose I'll have to show my boss the tapes, but I don't want to watch them with him. I never want to see something like that again. I can't get the image of Jeremy just smiling directly into the camera out of my mind. It was the creepiest look I've ever seen on another human being's face. Anyway, I'm going to try again to get some last-minute sleep before I have to go in and deal with this. I'll let you guys know what happens. 4:49 p.m. Updating from my phone. Apologies in advance for errors. My boss just finished watching the last of the tapes. I told him what to expect, but you can't really prepare someone for something like that. He's scared shitless. I still am too, and Jeremy is due to come in at 4. We got a little over an hour to get our shit together, but neither of us knows what to say to him. Maybe he's just some jacked up guy who likes to steal motor oil and scare the shit out of people. Or is he something else? I don't know if this is crazy, but does anyone think he could have anything to do with the time loop? My boss said he never noticed anything like that in the other tapes, but the way he popped up in this one made me think he knew I would be watching. It's like he wanted me to see what he could do, like he was showing off or something. The way he smiled into the camera was like a little kid showing you a sandcastle they just built or something. I don't know, I probably sound crazy. I sure feel the part. I'm going to talk to my boss some more. We have to calm ourselves down and figure out how to handle this. I'll update again tonight, but I have a really bad feeling about how this is going to play out. 33 p.m., no sign of Jeremy. I tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. 33 p.m., no sign of Jeremy. I tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. 33 no sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. Update 7:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. Update 8:33 p.m. No sign of Jeremy. Tried calling him, but his phone has been disconnected. We're calling the police. 58 p.m. Holy shit. I just got home and saw my previous updates. Things make less sense now than ever. Here's what I can tell you. I went to work. Jeremy never showed up. My boss and I decided to call the police, as you're well aware. When I picked up the phone to call, though, the sun went out. I shit you not, that's what I thought happened. Apparently, I blacked out for exactly 5 hours, because when I looked at the clock, it was 9:33. I think I got stuck in Jeremy's time loop, and then I snapped out of it at the exact point I blacked out, if that makes sense. But that's when things got really weird. My boss was right next to me when I blacked out, ready to corroborate my story to the cops. When I came to, the phone was in my hand, but it was dead. Not even a dial tone. My boss was still right there, but he wasn't moving. He was standing up, but frozen. I looked at the clock again, and it wasn't moving. The second hand was stuck on the 12. 33 exactly. The clock on the register wasn't moving either. My phone was frozen. There was even a customer at the register waiting for my boss to get him cigarettes. I'm betting that would have been his 5th pack of the day. I got the hell out of there. Didn't lock up, didn't turn the lights out. Sorry guys, I didn't grab the security tapes to upload on the internet. Believe me, that was the last thing on my mind. The gas station is on a major highway, and cars were parked all along it. Except they weren't parked. They were frozen. The people inside were sitting still like wax statues. I got in my car and prayed that it would start. Thankfully it did. About halfway home, time started up again. The static from the radio turned into music like it's supposed to be. And from what I could tell by listening to the host talk in between songs, no one noticed the time freeze. Or whatever it was. I was the only one. Well, I'm sure Jeremy noticed as well. I still have no clue where he is or what he's doing. I'm hiding in my room and calling the police again in the morning. I don't know if I ever got through to them before, or if I did, whether they took me seriously. I'm scared for my life at this point. I'll update tomorrow if I can. 3:33 a.m. I finally fell asleep last night around 4. I have no idea how I did it. I guess exhaustion finally got the best of me. This morning I woke up to my phone ringing. It was my boss. He'd been calling me since about 6. He woke up when time turned back on last night and immediately called the cops. They came by to see what was wrong. He told them everything. The police around here are all small-time guys. They were more concerned with the missing motor oil than anything, but my boss figured he would take it as long as he had their attention. They decided to go looking for Jeremy. We keep all our employees' applications on file, and since Jeremy just started working here, this was easy to find. They checked the address on it and headed over to his house. You're not going to believe what they found. The address Jeremy listed on his application was an empty lot, or at least now it is. There used to be a house there, but it burned down in 1993. Being a small town, almost everyone remembers that fire. A family of 4 used to live there way back when. Rumor has it that they had an estranged son who they never really talked about, but I can't say for sure if that's true. What I can say is true is that after an insurance investigation, the fire was ruled an arson. The entire house was soaked in oil and torched with a Molotov cocktail. The entire family was sleeping when it happened. None of them survived. They never caught the guy who did it. Rumor has it that when they tried to contact the estranged son, no one could find him. Anyway, my boss called and told me this and I freaked out. Then he asked me to come to the gas station. What are you crazy about? I said, but he assured me that the cops were there with him. Then he dropped a bomb. The FBI were also in town and they were going to talk to me one way or another. So I might as well come in. 15 and I wanted to go back to bed. but I figured I wouldn't be able to sleep much more anyway, so I went down. 4 men in suits greeted me and told me to have a seat. We went over everything 2 or 3 times until they got all the details down. I told them about Jeremy, the security tape, last night at work, everything. Finally, after I finished, one of the agents said, "Oh Christ, we've got another one on our hands." Then they made me sign a bunch of papers saying I wouldn't tell anyone about what happened, so I can't say much more. I might be breaking the law just by posting this. So now I'm home. I'm not sure what to do with myself. That agent's words when I told him this story are going to haunt me the rest of my life. Anyway, I've got to go. I have some errands to run today, and then I have to go into work to pick up some tapes. My boss and I think this new guy Jeremy, who's a complete creep, is stealing motor oil, and I have to watch the security footage to see if I can catch him doing it. I have better things to do, but my boss is paying me overtime under the table, and I'm trying to save up for vacation so I could really use the money. It should be pretty simple. The oil always goes missing right after his shifts. I figure I'll just watch the tapes, catch him in the act, and that will be that. This recording is from my son. I never thought I would tell you these stories, but Doc says I don't have much time left, and you should know where you come from. Not everything in this world is as it seems. When I was a boy, your great-grandfather, Chester, decided he was going to teach me the value of a hard day's work. A man's work, he called it. My father was out of town. His brother had become ill, and my father had gone to help him. Mother wasn't thrilled with the idea of me going down into the mines, but she trusted my grandfather, Chester. She gave me a hug, stared up at Chester, and told him to keep a close eye on me. He laughed and told my mother, "He'll be fine. I won't let nothing happen to the little fella. A day's work will be good for him." My mother watched as my grandfather and I walked down the dirt road towards town. There, we would catch a ride up to the old Quinamon mine. It was one of the oldest coal mines in West Virginia, and my grandfather had been working there since before I was born. Asking him if it was safe, he chuckled and replied, "Nothing in this life is safe, but you're my blood, and while I'm still breathing, I'll always protect you." He put his hand on my shoulder and smiled as we walked towards the elevator. "We were waiting on you," a friend of my grandfather said. A big man whose name I can't remember stood outside and closed the sliding grate, securing the elevator. With a clattering, the elevator lurched, then began its squeaky descent down into the earth. As the cage was lowered, I watched the rocky walls. They seemed to rise up slowly towards the surface. Looking around, I noticed there were 4 of us in total. My grandfather, another strong-looking man named Williams, and a tall young man in his early 20s. I think his name was Johnny. They all carried a wooden pickaxe and wore shiny helmets with a light on top. Adjusting mine, my grandfather fit the strap tightly under my chin. "Make sure you keep that on," he said. Finally, with a loud jolt, we reached the bottom. I followed the 3 men out into the darkness. The walls were lined with lights every 15 feet or so, but it was still very dim. People that have never been down that far don't understand what real darkness is. If those lights were to go out, you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. There were 2 main tunnels. Williams and Johnny took the one to the left, and my grandfather and I went to the right. As we walked, I noticed cracks and crevices on the far side of the wall. Some were 6 feet wide at the bottom. I tried to see how far back they went, but I could only see darkness. I wondered if anything could live down here, so far down. My grandfather gave me a wink and nodded towards the wall. "Start there," he said. Smiling back, I began to chip away. It was harder than I thought, but it was fun working next to my grandfather. I always wondered what it was like to work down in the mines. We worked together for most of the morning, taking breaks often for water and to rest. I was getting hungry and was just about to ask if we could stop for lunch when I heard a low rumbling. My grandfather looked at me, almost in disbelief. Then he grabbed my shoulder and pushed me into a large crevice in the wall. He used his body to block the opening from falling rocks. After a few seconds, though, the shaking stopped. Checking to see if I was all right, my grandfather said, "Come on, let's go look for the others." We stood up and went quickly back down the tunnel, stepping over the large stones that now littered the path in front of us. Stopping at the entry to the other tunnel, My grandfather called out, "Will." "Johnny." There was no answer. When we got to the end, some of the dust had begun to clear. Stopping, we saw the two men. Williams, the older man, had been buried under an enormous boulder. He was dead. Johnny, on the other hand. "What?" my grandfather said. The dust had cleared enough to see as he stared at something on top of Johnny. It was half the size of a man and looked like a spider, but it had a face. It sunk its fangs into Johnny, who looked to be alive but paralyzed, letting out a noise at saw us. My grandfather pushed me behind him. "Run," he said. I looked back up at him, frozen in place, and then I ran. Looking back down the tunnel, I saw my grandfather running towards the creature. I stopped in horror as I saw it sink its fangs into his shoulder. But my grandfather was a strong man, and still able to move, he jammed the pickaxe into the thing's abdomen. Its scream echoed off the walls. It threw him hard against the wall, and he slid lifeless to the floor. Then it turned its eyes to me. I ran down the tunnel towards the elevator, with that thing running behind me, its many legs pattering on the dirt floor. I think my grandfather had wounded it, because I was able to make it to the elevator. I struggled to close the grate all the way down when the spider got one of its limbs underneath and inside the elevator. The hair on its leg brushed against my skin. I climbed up as high as I could on the metal grating of the cage, but I knew I had nowhere to go. It was then that I saw my grandfather's face, twisted in pain and rage. He jammed the pickaxe into its neck. Struggling to free itself, it fell back to the floor as he stabbed it again and again until it stopped moving. My grandfather struggled to the elevator and closed the grate in front of me. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "Get in. There's no time." "I saw more of those things," he said. I remember him pressing the button as I cried out to him, the elevator starting to make its way up towards the surface. I could tell he was struggling to move. I think the venom had partially paralyzed him. The last thing I saw was my grandfather limping over to the supply area and grabbing a stick of what must have been dynamite. I watched him as he held up a match and made sure I made it to the surface. The last thing I remember was him forcing a smile and winking. I made it to the top, and the big man opened the cage as I yelled back at him to go help my grandfather. Then the earth shook again. This time, it was worse. Your great-grandfather had blown the mine with him still inside. I told the truth about what had happened, what had been down there. I don't know if they believed me, but they never opened the mine again. The funeral was quiet, somber, and my mother held me close. I still think she believed me. Grandfather had been good to his word. He had kept me safe. I have a feeling he may have saved the whole town as well. Anyway, I'm rambling. That's what happened. Well, it's the first of many things that happened. If I make it a little longer, I'll record more stories. If this is it, I hope you listen. I'm sorry I can't be there to watch you grow up. Listen to your mother. My name is Eric Williams, and I work as a political reporter in Washington, D.C. I cover Congress, the president, and whatever happens to be the trending topic of the day. I have a couple of sources that I trust and a few that I don't. But as luck would have it, I have found that my most important source of reliable information turns out to be my dog Applejacks. Let me back up a little. About 3 years ago, I was heading out of my apartment building to do a follow-up on the story when I heard a rustling in the hedges that flanked the wide stone steps by the entry. I figured that it must be the raccoon who had been getting into the dumpster, and I gave it no more thought. On my return trip, at around 11 p.m., I was halfway up the stairs when I heard a low whine coming from the bushes, so I backed up and peered into the dark undergrowth till I spotted the reflection of two eyes looking back at me. They were a good 3 feet up from the ground, so I started to back up when I heard the unmistakable low thumping of slowly wagging tail. "Hey there," I said in a calming voice. I moved back and sat down quietly on the bottom step. "You hungry, bud?" Unzipping my backpack, I fished around at the bottom, but all I could find was an energy drink and an old single-serving pack of cereal. Applejacks. I opened it and set it down on the step next to me. It took a few minutes, but then he slowly stepped out of the bushes and made his way, cautiously, towards the food. He was big, but I could tell he was less than a year old. He was rail thin and looked like he hadn't eaten in a while. Keeping one eye on me, he gingerly sniffed the Apple Jacks. Then hunger must have overtaken him, and he wolfed down his cereal. He flipped the bag over with his nose, checking to make sure he hadn't missed any. Then he looked up at me. I let him sniff my hand and then slowly gave him a scratch behind the ears. Tail wagging, he climbed onto the same step that I was on. Then he sat down, leaning against me. And that was it. We've been together ever since. I looked online, checked the papers and the local bulletin boards for a few weeks to see if anyone was looking for him. After a while, I stopped checking. Soon we settled into a routine. I took him out in the morning, then he slept for most of the day. In the evening, we went for a long walk in the park. The park we visit is sort of a dividing line between the very rich section of town and the slightly rundown section where my apartment is located. It's a huge park that goes on for miles, with a small river running along the length of it. There is plenty of room for him to chase a ball or run around with other dogs. But it quickly became apparent to me that Jax didn't like the company of other dogs. He wasn't aggressive, he just completely ignored them. They would approach him, tail wagging, wanting to play, but he kept his eyes on me. Along the river, there were several old stone bridges, and he loved to run down them, a million miles an hour, race across, then turn around and run back to me. This ritual would be repeated at every bridge. I would stand there laughing, urgently calling him back, as if it was a life and death situation. Sometimes he was a little late with the brakes, and he would plow into me, landing us both on the ground. Then, one particular Tuesday evening at the park, he crossed the bridge and stopped on the far side. He stood there looking into the woods. He glanced back as if to tell me something, then he headed straight for the woods. I called, but he kept going. By the time I made it across the bridge, all I could see in the distance was a man kneeling over something on the ground, so I ran. What happened? I called out. As I approached, I saw the man had tears in his eyes. There was a golden retriever on the ground in front of him, and Jax was laying with his head on top of the dog's chest. Did he hurt your dog? I asked. No, the man said. I think he saved him. My dog was having a seizure. They're usually quick to stop if I can calm him down, but this time it wouldn't stop. Not until your dog came and lay down next to him. It seemed to calm him. Will you be able to get him home? I asked. Yes, I'll carry him. We live just over there. He pointed at a large house up on the hill. Well, I better get him home. Thank you. About a week later, the man with the golden retriever spotted us at the park. He waved and walked over with his dog. It turns out he was looking for us. It turns out his name was Gregory Williams. It turns out he was just elected to the House of Representatives. I am buying Jax a triple cheeseburger on the way home. Maybe two. Since then, Gregory and I met at the park every Tuesday, and we've become good friends. The dogs play together while we talk, and once in a while, he'll give me a heads up on a story. I'm always careful to keep his name out of it. Months went by, and the first Tuesday in December rolled around. We met at the park as usual. While the dogs played, Gregory told me that he was leaving early for Christmas break, taking his family up to a cabin in Colorado. He invited me to come, with Jax of course. I said that sounded great, but I couldn't take that much vacation time. He told me nothing's happening in DC until after the holidays. Here, he reached for my phone and entered a number. That's the phone to the cabin. Get away as soon as you can. Drive up to Colorado Springs and call me. I'll direct you to the cabin. Make sure you bring Jax and anyone else you like. I mean it. Please come. My wife and kids are dying to meet the hero that saved our dog. And you. I laughed. Okay, I'll try. He looked at me, paused, then said, if you get there by the 15th of December, I'll give you the story of a lifetime. Then he nodded and walked away. His dog followed behind. I stood there silently, watching him go. Back in my apartment, I poured scoops of dog food into Jack's bowl, and I heated up some leftovers for myself. I had an interview tomorrow morning with Senator Susan Collins, the chairman of the Housing and Urban Development Committee, so I sat down on my computer to finalize my questions. I turned on the local news as background noise while I worked. There had been 2 shootings and a robbery nearby. A 10-year-old had gotten lost and then was found safe at a local Walmart. And Skywatchers may have a spectacular show in 2 weeks when a comet makes its closest approach on the 16th of December. Jax was sound asleep by the time I finished up and went to bed. I awoke in the morning to a soft beep of the message left on my phone. It was the senator's secretary canceling today's meeting. I called her office to reschedule, but there was only a recorded message saying the senator's office was closed for the holidays. With the morning off, I took Jax for a leisurely walk. Then I caught the train to the Capitol building. I walked over to the congressional offices to see if I could gather some info on an upcoming vote. The guard checked my press ID and nodded. I walked down the quiet hallway to the elevator. Stepping out on the 4th floor, I turned right and stopped. Ahead of me was a long hallway. There must have been 20 small offices. Every door was closed. Lights off. This was very odd, so I got back in the elevator. Stopping at every floor to check, the entire building was completely empty. This just doesn't happen. There are always congressional staff milling about. On my way out the door, I asked the guard what was going on. He just shrugged and said, "No idea." Grabbing a coffee from a nearby street vendor, I sat down at a bench overlooking the main walkway. Taking out my phone, I called my list of political contacts one by one. Either there was no answer, or a message was left saying, "I'm sorry the office is closed for the holidays." The Congress was slated to work until December 21st. Votes were scheduled for each day. This just doesn't happen. I sat there thinking, vaguely aware of the tourists passing by. A family with 2 kids sat down on the bench next to mine. The kids were asking their dad, "Will we be able to see it?" Yes, their dad answered, "You might not even need a telescope." Suddenly, I got this vision of thousands of people gathering with binoculars, having comet-themed parties. All the while, silent doom approached. Tossing my coffee into the garage, I headed for the train. I arrived home, took Jax out for a quick walk, and then sat down at my computer. What should I even look for? Impact? No, there are too many amateur astronomers out there. The news of a catastrophic impact would get out to the public. I spent the next week and a half achieving little to no results. Nothing in the news but excitement over the easily visible approaching comet. I even checked the conspiracy websites, but found nothing out of the ordinary. It was around 11 p.m. when it finally occurred to me that I should stop looking in the present and try looking into the past. I typed in the history of comets. Comets shed a lot of debris, pieces of which can slam into Earth. Comets can cause an airburst, igniting entire forests. They can also produce a high-altitude haze of particles. A comet is linked to the Justinian Plague in 541 AD. It was the first recorded instance of the Black Plague in Europe, when cities struggled to clear the streets of the dead. There was the Comet of the Black Death in 1347. During the winter of 1664, a bright comet was seen in the London sky. The Great Plague ravaged England for the next 2 years. I stopped reading, and I realized that if something was coming, Washington was the last place I wanted to be. It was 1:15 midnight, the early morning of December 15th. If I threw my stuff in the car and drove straight through to Colorado Springs, with a little luck we could make it. I looked over at Jax. "Want to go for a ride?" I was a child when I first got my dog paws. My father was away on a business trip. He went on a lot of those. Then somehow I convinced my mother to get a dog. We went together to the pound, and there he was. This pathetic-looking thing huddled in the corner by the concrete walls. He reminded me of myself. I didn't have a lot of friends, and I kind of felt like he looked weak, sad. Well, he waddled over to me, licked my face, and that was that. He was my best friend. Well, nothing happened for about a year as Paws grew up. He turned into a rather strong-looking dog, a big change from him being this pathetic thing slumped over in the corner. The year after I brought him home from the pound, I heard a knock on the door. Walking over, I saw an old, harmless-looking man with gray hair smiling through the glass. I smiled back, opened the door, and before I could even say hello, Paws leapt onto him and bit deep into his face. I tried to get him off, but he just kept tearing away at the old man's flesh. We lived in the city, and a police officer happened to be patrolling nearby and heard the commotion. He took out his gun to shoot Paws, but I screamed and leapt in front of him, shielding him from the officer. The policeman yelled at me to get out of the way, but I left that dog. The officer kicked Paws off the old man, and my dog cried out in pain. Then something strange happened. As the officer knelt down to help the old man up, we saw something on the ground next to him. A human ear. The policeman and I just stared at the ear. Then we both looked back up at the old man. Had Paws torn his ear off? But no. The old man, though bloodied, sure enough had 2 ears. The officer and I stared at each other, both a little confused, and that's when the old man took off, running down the driveway. I watched as the police officer paused for a few moments, then put 2 and 2 together. Something wasn't right here. He chased down the old man and pinned him up against the wall, cuffing his hands and calling for backup. It wasn't until a week later on the news I found out that that old man had been collecting the body parts of little boys. He was indeed a monster. There were 2 other occasions as well, one when I was a little older. I would walk Paws in a park near our home. The funny thing was this park was packed with people, so you think it would be safe. Well, every time I would take him, there was a beautiful older woman just sitting on a bench on the far edge of the park. She looked a bit out of place, but she seemed harmless as she would smile and say hello. From the first time Pa saw her sitting on that bench, he lowered his head and growled deeply. I figured it was nothing. The last time he had growled had been the old man, but this just must be a coincidence, right? Well, I was wrong. The next day in the park, the woman was nowhere to be seen, and Paws ran over to the bench where she would sit and began to dig. I tried to stop him, but before I could, I saw a bone that looked human. He kept on digging, and the police were called. A few days later, again on the news, it turns out that that beautiful woman had murdered her husband and 2 children last summer, burying them in plain sight, right in the park. Well, many years have passed, and Paws is older now. 13, actually. He doesn't walk as well as he used to, he can barely see anymore, and his eyes are cloudy, as if a mist is covering them more and more. I can barely stand the thought of losing my best friend. Well, I met Colleen about 5 months ago, and she is everything I could ever want. Smart, beautiful, kind, loyal. She's wonderful. She even volunteers at a home for sick children who are dying. She stays with them as they go through their last moments. It's amazing the type of woman that she is. I'm so lucky. Well, I had just proposed the week earlier and couldn't wait to introduce her to my parents. And of course, Paws. We flew across the country, holding hands the whole time on the plane flight like we were teenagers. When we got there, we got in a cab and headed over to my parents' home. Opening the door, my mother smiled and instantly gave Colleen a hug. My father walked over behind her, smiling as well, and told her welcome to the family. John has said such wonderful things about you. I asked about Paws, and they said nothing. Knowing how much I loved my dog, they were dreading telling me the news. They had taken him to the doctor, and he would have to be put to sleep in the morning. The doctor had nodded when they explained how much I loved Paws, and that they wanted him to pass away at his home. He was in the other room, laying on a blanket and sleeping. He couldn't walk anymore and hadn't opened his eyes for a couple days. Colleen gave me a hug as she knew how much he meant to me. Fighting back tears, I nodded to my parents and walked with Colleen into the guest bedroom where my best friend was laying down. I put my hand on his back and put my forehead against his. His eyes were closed, but as I continued to talk to him, he slowly opened his eyes. Barely able to move, his tail started to wag slowly, and he dug his head into my chest, and we both just sat there together. My protector. It was then I heard footsteps behind me and remembered that Colleen was here too. I had forgotten all about her. Paws turned his head and looked at Colleen through his cloudy eyes. I am recording this in case I don't make it back. At least there will be some record. Maybe you will have a chance. My name is David, and I've been working as a detective for 12 years. I'm good at my job. I even have a 95% clearance rate. That means that I've solved over 90% of my cases. The national average is 43. My nickname at the department is the Preacher. Funny, because I don't even believe it. Before my father died, though, he gave me the cross he always wore and made me promise I would never take it off. Any other time, I would have argued with him. Whenever I look in the mirror and see it, I tuck it away under my shirt. It always seems out of place, like it doesn't belong. I mention it because of what happened last Thursday. Thursday night, a case was reassigned to me. A woman had been found dead in the basement of an abandoned church. Her body had already been taken to the coroner, so I made myself a cup of coffee and grabbed my jacket on the way out the door. While I waited for the coroner to return, I examined the dead woman. Slowly moving around the table, I saw no obvious cause of death. Pretty 20s, blonde, no blood under the fingernails, no signs of struggle. Nothing. So I walked over to one of the metal chairs, sat down, and waited for him to return. I closed my eyes for a moment, giving them a rest from the harsh glare of the overhead lights. When I glanced back at her, that's when I saw 2 marks on her neck. How had I missed them? I walked to her side, not taking my eyes from the 2 marks on her throat. But as I leaned down to examine her, I found myself looking at nothing. There was nothing there. I thought of the scene of the homicide, an old abandoned church on Canal Road. A homeless man had been sleeping in the choir loft when he heard a woman screaming, so he ran outside and eventually flagged down a passing police car. They found her on the stone floor of the church basement. I watched the sun go down as I drove over to the scene of the church where the woman had been killed the day before. All the other officers had left, and I was alone in the quiet. Pushing open the large oak doors of the church, I stared up at the altar. It had been many years since the place had been abandoned. Maybe it was the cold stone face of the statue staring down at me, but I began to feel uneasy. I pulled myself together and headed down the stairway at the back of the church. It was pitch black, and as my flashlight flickered, I cursed myself for not bringing an extra one. I made my way down the circular stone stairway and found myself in front of a heavy oak door. A large carving of a cross had been scratched out. Pushing the oak door open slowly, and with some effort, I peered into the darkness of the basement. Ducking under the caution tape, I saw an old candle on a set of matches nearby. Striking a match, I lit the candle and illuminated the room before me. Although the body had been removed, I could still feel a sense of death around me. Kneeling down to examine the chalk outline on the ground before me, I put my hand where her body had been and closed my eyes, trying to picture her last moments. Something dark flashed inside my mind, and I got this feeling like something lives here, and maybe it's coming back, pushing those thoughts out of my mind. I examined the room carefully and found 2 things of importance. The first, a silver cross, like the one my father had given me, on the ground of the basement. While a cross in a church is nothing out of the ordinary, this one was different. Its surface was burnt charred, like it had been set on fire and just left to burn. I picked it up carefully and bagged it as evidence, using the candle to light my way. I came across something else, out of place. A word scribbled on the wall, barely even visible in the darkness. I wrote the letters into my notebook, Uterf Son. Later that night, back at home, I sat in front of my desk and stared at the burnt cross. Opening up the notebook, I tried to make sense of the letters on the wall. Maybe it had been there for years. Uterefs. As I stared out my kitchen window into the darkness of the forest, it occurred to me that maybe the letters were mixed up somehow. Moving the letters around for a few minutes, I realized I had neglected to do the most obvious thing. Maybe the word was backwards. As I wrote the word out, my excitement was gone as quickly as it had come. A sense of dread came over me as I looked down at my notebook. Nosferatu. This will be the end of my recording for tonight. I'm going back to the church. I have to. There has to be some explanation. God, I hope I'm wrong. If I make it back, I will record another update. But if I don't, maybe you will be able to pick up where I left off. Nosferatu. Nos we're off to. My work friends and I were at our favorite pub last night. Not a really fancy place, but cheap beer and close enough to home that I don't have to drive. The night started out normally enough. The 4 of us crammed into a small table off in the corner, mostly talking shop and shitting on our boss. Being this was the middle of the week, there weren't too many other people around, maybe around 8 or 9 others in the whole place. Everybody just kind of keeps to themselves, sort of people you'd expect to see in a pub on a Wednesday. Anyway, from where I'm sitting, I have a pretty good view of the TV behind the bar. Jesse, the bartender, is kind of lazily flipping through channels and passes by our local news channel. There's a brief burst of orange and red on the screen which I register as a fire happening somewhere, which then disappears as Jesse switches over to the next channel. Something about the image looks oddly familiar, though. Hey, Jess, can you switch that back? I call out to her. The news comes back on, and suddenly I recognize the building in the frame. It's my building, and it's burning. Holy shit, I say, loudly enough that a few people follow my gaze to the television. That's my apartment. The crowd in the bar falls kind of quiet. Everybody's staring up at the screen now. The screen shows a wide shot of the outside of my building. The camera must be set up on the north end of the block because I recognize a lot of shops on the ground floor. Property management, dry cleaner, convenience mart, etc. The top left corner of the building is aflame. It's not a huge fire by any means, but it looks like a few units between the top 4 floors or so have already been engulfed by the flames. Jesus, man, one of my coworkers says, that sucks. There's an uncomfortable murmur of agreement that passes around the table. I mean, I don't blame them. I wouldn't know what to say in this situation either. Yup, I agree, just as awkwardly. Thankfully, my apartment is only about halfway up and located on the west side of the building. I cross my fingers, hoping my stuff will be okay. The camera cuts to a reporter on the scene. He's standing a little farther away. Looking at the shops in the background, I can tell he's across the street on the northwest corner of the building. Firefighters are expected on the scene any moment, he's saying, and hopefully they'll be able to contain this horrible inferno before it spreads any farther. As I was saying before, it's very fortunate that everyone was able to evacuate the building before things got too bad, or who knows what tragic events may have unfolded. He's really laying it on thick, my other coworkers joked. I chuckled a bit. All things considered, at the moment, it really didn't seem all that bad. But then, a few moments later, hang on, the reporter on TV says, we're getting some updated information. It seems. Hang on one moment while we readjust the camera. The previously locked down camera starts to shift, the angle focusing on an area of the building about halfway up the west side. All the lights in the building are out except for one. I feel a weird creeping sensation as I start counting the windows from the bottom. 5 up, 2 over. That's my place. I swore I turned that light out, I think at first. Then I see it. There's a person standing in my window. The camera is zoomed out too far to make out any features, but it definitely looks like a man, and it's definitely standing in my apartment. I watch, petrified, as the camera zooms in closer. The reporter babbling on about the overlooked, ill-fated souls still trapped in the blazing such and such. As the image gets closer, I start to make out more details. The person is dancing. Or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but he's moving around a lot, and everything he's doing has this bizarre rhythmic quality to it. He starts waving his arms in the air, back and forth, and then he's waving them up and down at his sides. Then he's banging both fists on the glass. Then he's waving his arms over his head again, back and forth. Everything he's doing is to the exact same tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He starts jumping up and down, waving his arms over his head like he's trying to get someone's attention from a long distance. But everything is to the exact same rhythm over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. What the fuck, I say. My voice is a hoarse whisper. And then the camera gets a little closer, and finally we can make out the person's features. It looks almost exactly like me. It's wearing the exact same clothes that I'm wearing now. Clothes I changed into moments before leaving the apartment earlier. Its face looks almost exactly like mine as well, except for its eyes. Its eyes are far too big for a normal person. It also has this almost comical look of horror on its face. I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine if someone were pretending to look scared, but as a joke. It would have almost seemed funny if the circumstances were different, but instead it was just extremely unnerving. No one in the bar is talking now. Everyone is fixed on the TV. The person is still swaying and waving around, beating its hands on a glass or jumping in circles. I almost don't hear the reporter mention the fact that firefighters have rushed into the building and are now heading for my floor. Oh God, I think. Without really understanding what was happening. Please don't go in there. I stare transfixed at the screen. From this angle, You can just barely see the top of my front door through the window, not too far behind where this creature is flailing about. Right now, it's holding its face in his hands and shaking its head from side to side as if saying no. Suddenly, the door behind it bursts open as, presumably, the firefighters have entered my apartment. The creature stops moving. For a second, I see its expression change. The comical look of horror is gone, replaced by a huge smile filled with enormous pointed teeth. Then the lights go out. We all just sat there, staring at the screen as the camera slowly zoomed out from the now dark window. No one says anything as we all quietly pay our bill and leave. I went directly to my sister's place across town and asked to stay with her. I told her there was a fire at my apartment, and that's it. When I tried to find footage from the news online later that night, it seemed like they had edited that last part out. I don't know if any of you on this subreddit know what that thing was, but I hope they didn't put out that fire. I hope they let the whole damn place burn to the ground. My family has been haunted by a spirit for nearly 13 years. By Kyle Harrison. Like clockwork, I've come to expect its shrill tones groaning in the night. It starts soft, the way an infant might wail if abandoned on the street. Then it rises and rings out through the trees, overcoming them and snaking its way to our home. Eventually, it settles into a repetitive, high-pitched scream, the kind that a woman might make if she were stabbed to death. When we first moved here and heard it, Malcolm assumed it had to be some prankster kids trying to initiate us with some local hazing custom. This property is remote, though, and spotty intruders would be easy. Plus, the disembodied screams were enough to make anyone feel on edge. It couldn't be the work of truant kids. When it didn't happen again after that first time, we assumed it was just a fluke. But that second Halloween, we realized we definitely had a haunting on our hands. What do you suppose it wants? I remember asking nervously. Dad and Malcolm wisely boarded up the windows and bolted the doors. We were sure such simple physical precautions could protect us from the supernatural. And somehow it did. We stayed awake all night listening to the wailing. The noises got louder. Sometimes we heard the spirit bang against the house like it was trying to get inside. I think we prayed all night. I know that none of us got any sleep. Gradually, though, as the years passed, somehow we became accustomed to the ghost. We began to understand that as long as we didn't do it any harm, it would do us none as well. We did consider moving, and we came close too, but then the ghost dissuaded us from that path. One time, as we prepared for the yearly haunting, we were discussing the possibility of buying a property on the opposite side of town. Will we have to mention the ghost to any prospective buyers? Mom asked. Malcolm seemed to think that we should, but Dad was against it. If we say a word, we'll never get out of here. Then, as the clock struck midnight, I realized something. Where's the ghost? I asked. None of us said a word, only listening to the wind and waiting for the screaming. But instead, we were greeted with utter silence. Dad went to the window and peered out. Must be taking a night off, he joked, as he began to raise the blinds. Wait, maybe it's a trick, Malcolm warned. The dad complied with his request, and we sat still for another hour. Still nothing. Maybe the ghost moved on, I suggested nervously. I don't know why, but the silence was scarier than anything we had experienced before. As we looked out toward the property, the only thing worth noting was a mist of black smoke wafting across the night. I want to bed, Mom said. Dad joined her. Suddenly, all our preparations seemed unnecessary. But I didn't go to bed. Neither did Malcolm. Something felt very wrong. The ghost is normally around the barn, right? He whispered once our parents were sound asleep. Yeah, near the creek. I was still watching the smoke. It snaked across the sky, almost with a mind of its own. I knew he was planning to go investigate, and like any younger sibling, I followed. The air was still that night, our traditional jack-o'-lanterns on display at the edge of our fence line. But still, not a whisper from the ghost. We were almost at the barn. Malcolm lit a lantern, peering into the old building, but there was nothing there. Disappointed, we returned to the house and he remarked, I guess I never thought I'd say this, but I missed the ghost. Did you leave the door open? I asked as we got close to the front porch. Malcolm pursed his lips together and then dashed inside. He dropped the lamp in a panic and began to wail. His agony sounded worse than the ghost. I came inside slowly, looking into my parents' bedroom. They were lying there, seemingly sound asleep, but a closer inspection showed me that something evil had crossed over them. Their bodies were torn apart at the chest cavity with a diagonal slash, and there was dark black smoke coming out of them. I collapsed to the ground, shocked as the smoke escaped outside the window and disappeared. Malcolm was trying to resuscitate them, but I could tell from the wounds and the blood loss. It was pointless. That was 3 years ago. Since then, the ghost has returned, and Malcolm and I have done our best to keep things together while we survive. The mortgage and other debts have made it impossible to leave. I've come to understand that the ghost was never here as a threat, but as a warning. When it screams, it tells us that we are safe from a greater evil. Perhaps it even protects us from it. I've come to respect its purpose. Tonight, though, I don't know what's going to happen. Because it's nearly midnight, and there is only quiet. It was dark, dreary. The rain clouds had moved on, but water still dripped from the rooftops and skyscrapers. They fell and fell and fell. Hypnotizing. Dangerous in a city where it's already so easy to be caught off guard. The hooded man approached me in the middle of the night as I was walking home from a business meeting that ran late. He said the words that tear at the soul. A question with infinite answers, but always a constant result. I will grant you one wish. I laughed to myself. Crazy person or not, I knew how these stories always went. Make wishes granted in a horrifying way. Wish or dies. Simple as that. I'd read The Monkey's Paw. I've seen Wishmaster. I wouldn't be so carelessly stupid. I thought myself clever when I made my wish. So innocuous that any play on it would be downright foolish. I wish for $1. Had it been a crazy person, even he could have granted this wish. But it was no crazy person. I watched as the hooded man raised his hands, cupping them around the air, and slowly pulled a single dollar into reality, as though out of a black hole. It gingerly floated down into my cupped hands. I looked at the bill, incredulous, and when I looked up, the man was gone. At home, I could do nothing but stare at the bill, unsure if I had truly seen what I thought I had. How could he have done it? Was he really a genie of some sort? Was this bill even real? Or am I just dreaming? I was sure I wasn't, but these weren't the questions that bothered me the most. The thought that racked my brain endlessly was, did I just waste a legitimate supernatural wish on a single dollar? I had figured if the man was the kind of genie I'd been brought up by horror stories to believe in, that he would have created some sort of hell for me in this wish. I figured the dollar would create minimal suffering at best. But I hadn't honestly expected the wish to come true anyway. I thought I was just humoring a crazy man, but nothing has happened. The supernatural being granted me my wish and went off. I could have had anything. Anything. I could have wished for billions instead of a single dollar. I could have wished for power. To be superhuman. I could have wished for world peace. But I had $1. $1. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I didn't sleep for the next week. How could I? Every missed opportunity, embarrassing moment in my past, anything I wanted to change just zipped through my mind. Every little annoyance echoed endlessly in my head. The woman in the cubicle next to me, who kept smacking her gum. I could have wished her mouth shut. The guy who kept bringing his work problems to me because he couldn't do them, but still got paid more. I could have wished for him to be fired. My boss, who did absolutely nothing but shit on me day in and day out. I could have wished him dead and had myself put in his place. Saturday, I went to work. The only person who worked Saturdays is my boss. That dumb shit, he never really worked. He went in to bang his secretary in empty offices while his wife at home with her 2 kids believed he was at work making them a better life. She would have thanked me. The stapler on my desk would do the trick. I caught the secretary coming out of my boss's office. The back end of the stapler gashed right into her temple. She was out cold. My boss, still buttoning his pants up, tried the old trick of yelling at me and telling me I was fired to get me to stop advancing. But I could see the fear in his eyes. He couldn't even work his zipper right. I pushed him onto the desk, grabbed the fountain pen, and stabbed him in both of his eyes. This time, not so quick as a bash to the head. As he writhed on the desk, I took my rightful seat at his desk. This is what my wish should have been, I thought. This was the happiest I've been all week. It could have been the happiest I'd ever been, as far as I could remember. Someone must have heard the screaming on one of the lower floors. We were at the top of 16 stories. Maybe it was someone else's boss screwing his secretary too, who heard us. Someone who didn't have the guts to murder for a better job. Whoever it was, I knew they heard us because I could hear the faint sound of sirens outside the building on the streets below. They probably won't let me keep this drum after I'm done. I went up to the roof of the building, dragging the still twitching body of my former boss. When I got to the top, I found out I was right. Cop cars littered the street. Those are what I aimed for when I tossed the body headfirst off the building. I hit one car dead on. A cop car was always where I thought that guy belonged anyway. I heard the SWAT team bust the door open leading up to the roof. I pulled the dollar bill out of my pocket. My one wish. My one clever wish. I tore it in half and jumped before the SWAT team could grab me. Spending life in a cell would only create more problems I couldn't wish away. As I fell toward the pavement below, I looked down. In the midst of the police, no one seemed to notice a hooded man with glowing red eyes standing directly below me, arms wide as though he were about to catch me. My last thought before I showered the ground with my guts, my only clear thought in the entire past week, was that the devil was far more clever than I. My girlfriend Evelyn and I have been dating for about 4 weeks. 4 incredible weeks. I've never met anyone like her. It's like when she comes into the room, everyone just stops what they're doing and stares. Beautiful isn't a strong enough word. It's more than that. It's almost mesmerizing. A few days ago, she convinced me to go to an old cabin that had been in her family for years. I said yes. I'd never been able to say no to Evelyn. I never wanted to say no. The weekend started out normal. We drove deep in the forest. She insisted that she drive as she knew the way, and I spent my time listening to the music she played. I can't really remember the drive. We arrived at the cabin sometime around us, I think, and that's when things started to get a little strange. Evelyn smiled as she picked up an old axe and said she was going to chop wood for a fire. There was something about the way she held the axe. Alone now in the cabin, I searched for a candle while the last moments of sunlight were fading from the forest. I lit a match, held it to the candle, and jumped back in surprise. On the wall was a painting of an old woman, far off in the distance of a field, smiling, I think, in my direction. It looked so old, yet I swear to God she looked like she was alive. I swallowed and continued down the hallway. Something about this place didn't seem right. It was strange the cabin looked so small from the outside, but now that I was here, there were endless rooms. How was this even possible? As I walked down the hallway, a single candle illuminating my way, there were dozens of the same painting of that old woman. But they weren't exactly the same. As I continued down the hallway, each new painting showed her a little closer than the last. Beginning to be afraid, I looked backwards towards where I had come from. All I could see was a tunnel of darkness. I tried to open the door to the closest room, thinking maybe I could leave through a window. But every single door was locked. As I kept looking for an escape, I couldn't help but keep glancing at the paintings. The old woman would appear larger, closer. That's when it struck me. There was a cabin in the painting. It looked kind of like this cabin, and she was getting closer to it. This can't be happening, I said. But it was. As the painting now revealed, she was standing on the porch, smiling wide at me and holding the axe that Evelyn had taken. Come to think of it, she was wearing the same clothes that Evelyn had been wearing, and that smile. It was mesmerizing. As I walked down the hallway, I struggled to take my eyes from the smile of the woman in the painting, each new glimpse revealing her a little closer. First she was opening the doorway to the cabin, then stepping in, and now she stood in front of the hallway. I want to die here. I want to run, but I can't take my eyes away from her smile. I realized I knew what she was then. I think I always knew. Staring into the painting one last time, it showed that she was now right behind me. I looked farther into the painting and watched her. As she raised the axe, my God, she's so beautiful. Have you ever seen something so horrifying that you know deep down it will replay in your dreams forever? Some time ago, when I was just a boy, I had one dream to finally meet the real Santa Claus. That December, I had been completely obsessed with photography and video and had been recording and taking pictures of everything in sight. Yes, I had taken pictures of everything: Christmas trees, neighborhood puppies, even a batch of burnt gingerbread cookies my mother had taught me how to bake earlier in the week. I was a pretty straight-laced kid, and I was the last kid I knew to still believe in Santa. "Don't tell me you still believe that," my friend Chris had said, to which I replied nothing. I was a stubborn little boy, and I knew for a fact that if I truly just believed enough, that I would indeed see something amazing after the clock struck midnight and became Christmas Day. I was right. Sort of. If you would like to continue living in blissful ignorance, this is where you should stop listening. Maybe it's better if you don't know the truth. As I said, carrying around a camera was my thing, Ron Howard style. That year on Christmas Eve, I had planned to be the first child on Earth to get concrete proof of Santa's existence. In my young mind, I had seen newspapers and news channels around the globe showing my evidence. They would interview me, the little boy who had proven everyone wrong, and maybe then people would finally start to believe. That evening, my mother and father took turns tucking me into bed before shutting off the lights and heading back to their room. They had no idea what I had planned. After hearing their door close gently with a click, I headed downstairs to scout the living room. Where could I place the camera to give me the absolute best chance to get him on video? As the hours passed uneventfully, I moved the camera around to record various locations: the fireplace, the outside window, the kitchen where I had placed the poorly made gingerbread cookies. Don't judge me, I have tried my best. Time continued to pass, and it wasn't until I first heard the clock strike midnight that something unexpected happened. I heard the basement door open slowly. That was odd. I thought Santa was supposed to come from the chimney. Part of me wanted to rush over and greet him, but I found another larger part of myself telling me to hide and wait to see what happened next. I chose my parents' new couch in the corner of the room as my hiding spot, running behind and peeking ever so slightly around its corner and towards the Christmas tree. Nothing happened for a few moments, and I was beginning to wonder if I had imagined the sound of the basement door creaking open altogether. And then I heard the whistling. But it wasn't jingle bells or anything like that. No, it wasn't cheerful, and it certainly didn't contain the holiday spirit. The snow had started falling more steadily outside, and for some reason that odd whistling had suddenly made me realize how completely isolated the three of us were out here. My father had bought the small cabin some time ago, the nearest neighbor being half a mile or more away. It seemed even farther in a blizzard. This was my first, and I had been very excited about being snowed in for a few days. That was until the thought occurred to me of being snowed in with something else, something that had no business being there. The wind began to push against our secluded home as well, seeming to hit all sides at once. Wow, my parents could sleep through anything, it seemed. My eyes pulled away from the chaotic weather outside my home and back towards the basement door. And then I saw him, or should I say it, coming slowly closer. The figure was cloaked and seemed to float just above the living room floor. Did I think about screaming? Yes, I did. Looking back, though, I'll give myself credit, I stayed calm. And perhaps this still was Santa after all. I decided to wait and see what happened. It seemed that the tall figure hadn't seen me peeking out from behind the couch, because it just kept on floating towards the Christmas tree and fireplace. Whatever it was, it began to whistle again, and this time I was able to identify the tune Silent Night. The melody was off rhythm, and was the only time in my life that hearing a song made me feel uneasy. Very uneasy. I realize how insane this next part is going to sound if we haven't gotten there already. But as I watched the tall figure near the Christmas tree, I could hear it begin to sniff deeply. The tree swayed and shook against the force of the creature's nostrils. And then it began to speak. "Come out, little boy." He had seen me. There would be no hiding anymore. Taking a deep breath, I summoned the courage to stand. "Come closer." I took a small step. Closer. The snake-like voice continued. I heeded its words, walking forward until a tall figure stood directly in front of me. I felt small in its shadow, smaller than I had ever felt. "Are you him?" The creature made a soft, almost inaudible noise, perhaps it was laughter, and then pulled the cloak away to reveal itself. I fainted. When I came to, the creature was still standing where it had been, a soft grin plastered to its face. You aren't the first one that's fainted at the sight of me. You're lucky I didn't eat you. Eat me? I stammered. Yes, but that would be only fair. It's very offensive to faint at the sight of someone you know. I said nothing, only staring up at the creature. Though I've tried to forget its form with time, I can still remember it clearly. It was thin, terribly thin, and its face was beyond imagining. Though its teeth were clearly visible, I could see no eyes, and what looked like thorns protruded from the crest of its head. Branches extended from the thing's body in all directions, and it dragged what looked like a sack behind it. To answer your question, no, I'm not Santa Claus. The creature knelt down near me, and I could feel its icy breath push against my eyes and face. But I know him. You do? The creature nodded. Of course. He's my brother. The news that this terrifying monster was the brother of Santa took a long time for my childhood brain to process, at the end of which I was probably even more confused than before. How? The creature paused. Well, normally I don't share such things, but I admire your courage. And it's been a long while since I've spoken with anyone, even a boy. It smiled, showing its sharp teeth, and then continued. For every good act in this world, there is an evil one. For every kind gift, there must be an unkind gift. I bring balance to the good my brother spreads. I bring evil, I whispered, finishing his words. The creature nodded as if pleased. You are a smart little boy. So far I'm glad I haven't eaten you. My mind churned again. So what evil have you brought us? There was a long silence before it replied. You are very wise. Are you sure you want to know? I nodded, and it smiled back. Very well. Though my gifts will not take effect on this day, their influence will be felt through the next year and beyond. It pulled out the sack that followed closely behind and set it on the floor before me. There was only one gift inside, which upon a closer look had both my mother and father's names written neatly on a dark card that sat on top of the box. Open if you dare, it whispered. As I knelt down next to the presents, the room seemed to grow colder, the wind swirling violently now just outside the foggy glass. The lights flickered on and off as I began to unwrap the small box. I laid the wrapping paper down neatly, piece by piece, on top of the tree's red and white Christmas skirt. Looking up at the creature, I said 2 words. I'm afraid. Its long, thin arm reached out towards me then, finally settling on my closest shoulder. Though I still could not see the creature's eyes, it seemed to gaze at me nonetheless. It seemed to be thinking as it cocked its head from one side to the other. Look upon my face, little child. I have been deformed and misshapen by the evils that are mine to bear. I cannot change my form any more than you can change the fate of your family. All I can do is bear it. Though still afraid, I was suddenly overcome with a great sympathy for the creature. I'm sorry. It seemed taken aback for a moment before replying, Don't be fooled, little child. I am not fully innocent. The box before me broke open then, revealing a blinding shine of dark purple, the color of a vibrant spring's first bloom. It bathed the room in its deep shades as the box pulsated in front of my eyes. I couldn't help it. I looked deep into the calling purple, into worlds unseen. I saw the creatures of my nightmares. Monstrous, malevolent beings, some as tall as the sky above. But worst of all, I saw my parents. It was a rainy winter day as my father drove home from work. His briefcase on the passenger seat and a worried look in his eyes as he squinted through the windshield. The rain came down in sheets. No, Dad. He couldn't see the large semi that had gently pulled beside him. It drifted closer into his lane. And then, stop. I don't want to see. But it was too late. The truck overtook my father and pushed his car into the bridge's guardrail. I wish I could say he didn't suffer. A violent wave of purple as my eyes were taken elsewhere. A hospital. No, please. It was my mother, receiving the cancer diagnosis and lying alone in the hospital bed. She stared out into the darkness. I can't take this, I told the creature. And maybe I imagined it, but to this day I think it gave a small look of pity. It knelt closer. She'll live. Why did you show me this? I asked. The basement door opened again with a creak, and the creature fell backwards to the floor, striking its head and letting out a sigh. I realized then that as terrifying as this thing was, there was still one that even it must answer to. I must go, and whispered, pulling the cloak over its bony head and concealing its form once more. I watched as it floated back towards the basement steps, and then said the words I will always remember. Be afraid for what is to come, child, but do not let it consume you as it has me. I watched its figure begin to fade away into the darkness, the last proof of its existence being the soft words that carry their way through the air and into my ears. For only in death and suffering will you find life. Swapsies, no takebacks. That was what my little brother Dylan used to call out when I traded candy with him, especially around Halloween. He was 6 on our last Halloween together, old enough for me to take him trick-or-treating alone and for him to really appreciate it. I still remember that last time all these years later. One reason for that is because even at 9 I appreciated that I was lucky to have such a sweet little brother. Old enough for me to baby him, yet close enough to my own age to have fun with him too. We'd always been close since he was born. Another reason was that the following year, 2 weeks before Halloween in 2005, Dylan died in his sleep. They told us it was a congenital heart defect that had never been caught, and that most likely he had just stopped. It destroyed our family. Even leading up to the funeral, my parents were alternating crying, consoling each other, and arguing over nothing. They wound up getting a divorce 2 years later. For my part, I cried some, but most of the time was reserved for hating myself. Thinking about how if I hadn't made a big deal of getting my own room just a few months earlier, I might have heard him stop breathing. Maybe I could have gotten him help in time. My parents told me that wasn't so, that the doctors said it was just one of those things that couldn't be helped. But all that did was make me wonder who was lying, my parents or the doctors. The week after his funeral, I went back to school. We had a substitute teacher I'd never seen or heard of before. She said her name was Miss Grackle, and she was going to be replacing our normal 4th grade teacher, Miss Porn, until she got over the flu. She'd been there for the latter part of a week I'd missed, so the other students in my class seemed pretty much used to her. But she made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't fully understand. She wasn't dressed weird and was well-kempt, but there was something off about her. Her pale skin was smooth and tight, but almost too much so, as though she had somehow been birthed as a fully grown woman with flesh that had not seen the sun or been touched by air. I heard some of the boys whispering at lunch about how pretty Miss Grackle was, making the vague and clumsy innuendos that young boys do. And she was objectively attractive. Her refined features and a trim figure framed by long, curly brown hair. But her eyes, they stared out like a doll's eyes. Dark, hard, inscrutable. And as the week wore on, I found that they kept focusing on me. It was that Wednesday that Miss Grackle asked me to stay after the final bell rang. I felt the knot of unease that had been growing in my belly since Monday morning tighten into a painful ball of fear. I didn't want to stay. As I watched my classmates and friends rush out of the room, I wanted to run with them, to keep running until I was home again and upstairs in Dylan's room. I had taken to sleeping there, and while Elizabeth, can you come up here, please? I flinched at the words, my name sounding oily and sinister on her tongue. I glanced up and nodded before sliding out of my desk and approaching the front of the room. Yes, ma'am. Is something wrong? The woman smiled, her perfectly even teeth gleaming like white stones between the red ring of lipstick expertly lining her lips. No, nothing like that, dear. I just wanted to check in on you. See how you're doing. When I stared at her without response, she went on, I heard about your little brother's passing, you see. Just a few days ago, I understood. My chest tightened. The only blessing about school now was that it wasn't home. It gave me a forced reprieve from all the sad reminders of Dylan's death. An occasional moment where I forgot to hate myself. And no. Yes, ma'am. That's true. Grackle made a clucking noise deep in her throat. So very sad. He was what? 5 or 6. Why was she asking all this? I wanted to tell her it was none of her business. To get my brother out of her rotten mouth. But I was young, and she wasn't just an adult, but a teacher, albeit a substitute one. So I just jammed my hands on my jeans and nodded, trying to avoid her unblinking stare. I heard her breath quicken slightly at my nod, and despite myself, I looked up, just in time to see her wiping away a spot of drool from her pale and perfect chin. Her eyes locked on mine again, seeming to hold me where I stood. Was he buried fresh and whole? I didn't understand what she was asking, yet I heard myself say, yes, whole and fresh, and only 4 days in the ground. My own heart was hammering so hard I knew it would burst any second, and she just kept staring at me, not letting me move, weighing something secret and terrible behind those dark eyes. And then I was home. I woke up on my bed, a moment of vertigo sending the room spinning before my brain acclimated to where I was. My mother was calling me to come down. It was time for us to go to Wednesday evening services at our church. My family had always been casually religious, but I could already tell that my mother was becoming more devout by the day. I didn't fault her for finding comfort in the church, and I'd always enjoyed Sunday school well enough. But if not for her wanting me to go, it was the last place I'd have wanted to be. The strangeness of my encounter with Grackle aside, I didn't savor the idea of being buffeted between groups of well-meaning strangers as they murmured sympathies and gave pitying looks. I wanted to be alone with my memories of Dylan and my guilt and my pain. By the time we were halfway through the service, I had half convinced myself the conversation with Grackle had been just a dream. I had been exhausted from going on 2 weeks and waking up at home like that. Well, it made more sense than a substitute teacher talking to me about Dylan and his burial like that. It also made me realize something else. I could go visit him. Dylan's actual funeral had been in a sanctuary at one of our local funeral homes, but he was buried in one of the far new lots of the church's cemetery. I felt the stir of sad excitement at the thought of going to visit him, and even though it was getting dark as we left the service, when I asked my mother if I could go see him for a minute, she only nodded absently, before going back to talking with 2 of her commiserating friends. I ran across the first cemetery lot and onto the second. I had spent time playing around these tombstones for years, so it wasn't hard to pick my way towards his grave even in the dimming twilight. It was that familiarity and expectation of what I should see around his grave that gave me pause as I got closer. There was some kind of small hill close to his gravestone, a roundish mound that hadn't been there last time we visited a few days ago. Even more strange, there was someone already at Dylan's grave. And they were digging. I felt confused anger and fear as I picked up speed again, yelling, "Hey, stop," even as the figure stood up and turned its face to me. In the orange glow of the fading October sun, that pale skin seemed to blaze in the dark, the cascade of brown curls looking now more like dark vines twisting down into the mires of some forbidden swamp. Miss Grackle smiled at me briefly before returning to her digging. "Stop." I didn't know what was going on, but I knew it was wrong in a way that went beyond anything I'd ever experienced before. I didn't know words like desecration or sacrilege yet, but in my heart every thundering beat screamed bad. Wrong. Stop. No. In a staccato rhythm that permeated my whole body and weakened my knees. But she didn't stop. She kept digging. Her long, thin-fingered hands churned up the dirt as she made quick work of the earth between her and her prize. Within a few seconds, she had uncovered the small white coffin where my brother lay, and dragged it out of its grave with surprising ease. I started screaming at her again, but trailed off into silence as I saw where she was taking it. The strange new hill wasn't a hill at all. It was a person, or at least part of one. Hulking and covered in rags, the figure was incomplete. Somehow, as impossible as it seemed, it stood there with a large cavity in its middle. There was no head, and below where it should be, a ragged darkness gaped out from between the folds of tattered cloth. I was still staring at it dumbly as Miss Grackle reached it. She let go of Dylan's casket, and giving me a quick, wry glance, she pulled herself into that larger body, her flesh twisting and flowing to fill the chasm and complete the towering thing before me. Her head looked different now, and in truth, she was wholly unrecognizable, except for those same damned, black, staring eyes. She swung those eyes towards me and twisted her mouth oddly before speaking in a deep and rough voice. "You say no, but what do you offer in exchange?" The thing paused as though considering, but I could tell from its tone that it was simply playing a game, mocking me. "Yourself." I had felt frozen to the ground before, but now I started backing away. What exchange? A short, coarse laugh. A trade. Dylan goes back in the hole, and you come with me. I stopped again. In spite of my fear, go with you. Where? Oh, you'll see. What do you say? Just remember, if you say yes, the deal is struck. It held out its hand towards me, and then in a higher voice, like that of a child, it screeched swapsies, no takebacks. I ran. I ran through the deepened shadows, terrified that at any moment that enormous, long-fingered hand would close on my shoulder or seize my ankle. I ran back into the church, and when I clutched my mother with tears streaming down my face, she looked down and began to cry herself, sweeping me up in her arms and carrying me back to the car to go home. She thought I was just upset at visiting the grave. And it wasn't until the next day that her and my father started questioning me more intently, after the church groundskeeper found what had happened to Dylan's grave. I lied, of course. They would have never believed me, and I was too upset for them to press me hard. I later wondered if that lie, unknown but possibly somehow still sensed by my parents, was what solidified the distance that continued to grow between the three of us. They were still good parents, or good enough, and I know that they loved me. But that final loss of my brother, the terrible mystery of how and why and where he had been taken, was what finally killed the laboring heart of my family forever. There was one other lie I told to my parents, though this was more of an omission. I never told them about the note I found on my desk when I finally returned to school on Friday, the first day of Miss Horn's own return. It was written in small, slanted blue letters on a neatly cut square of yellowing paper, a light smudge of pink staining the top right corner. Holding the paper in my trembling hands, I read the words over and over. Even now, there's not a day I don't see them in my mind. Thank you for the number nums, Elizabeth. I enjoyed them last night, and they were open wide. I nodded nervously, though I was a little doozy from the Novocaine, if that's what it's called. I realized as I was starting to lose consciousness how odd that request was. Open wide. I already had the obstructive steel mechanism holding my jaw open, and it was now in total control of my ability to open or close it. I suppose all dentists are taught to say that. But where am I going? Confused, I looked around awkwardly as Dr. Willie began to push me down a long tunnel that seemed to go down. Another trick of the mind. We were on the 10th floor of the building. There were no tunnels. Still, it seemed I was being pushed down into the earth. Perhaps you can imagine how my fears escalated as well when Dr. Willie began to whistle as he strapped my arms around the cold frame of the wheelchair. Was this normal? Was I dreaming? No. The wheelchair suddenly stopped. The tall man stared down at me, a grin spreading wide across his face. But don't worry, you know what they always say. Quick and painless. He paused for a moment, crouching down to my eye level. Well, mostly. He winked again before walking behind to push me farther down the black hallway and resuming his whistling. He turned the hand crank that attached to the metal tool controlling my jaw, and I would have screamed in pain if I could have. Though I couldn't yet feel my face due to the drugs, I knew that some damage had already been done. My heart began to beat faster as the dark corridor came more clearly into view. I doubt anyone reading this will believe what I'm going to tell you next, but I remember it clear as day. The walls around us weren't made from wood or concrete. Nothing like that. The walls were made of teeth. Small teeth. I know what you're thinking, and the answer to your question is yes. His voice echoed off the walls around us, seeming to come from everywhere. And then we stopped. We stopped in a small room at the very end of the tunnel. Dear. Willie put the brakes on the chair and walked over to a shiny steel table that was pushed back against the far corner of the room. The small amount of light illuminating the room flickered off, and I'm not sure how much time passed. When it came back on, Dr. Willie was standing, holding what looked like some type of saw. Yet that wasn't the worst part. He had transformed into something inhuman. A tall, thin creature in a perfectly tailored pink dress. He had no eyes anymore, and that's when I finally put the whole picture together. He was the Tooth Fairy, or should I say a Tooth Fairy. There are many of us, he had said as he spun closer, still holding the saw and taking great joy in watching the tears begin to stream down my face. I couldn't tell you if it were from the drugs, terror, or both, but I passed out. When I awoke, my mother was standing over me. "I'm so sorry. How are you feeling?" The Novocaine must have still been in effect, because opening my jaw to try and speak was incredibly painful. Only a mumbled nonsense came forth. "Don't try to speak," she said. And that's when I noticed that we weren't alone in the room. There was a doctor standing beside her. But it wasn't DR. Willie. It was someone else. He rested his hand on my mom's shoulder and whispered just loudly enough into her ear that I could still hear him. "We'll have to tell him." I began to cry again, desperately trying to ask what it was that they were hiding from me. It was my mother's turn to cry then, as she buried her head into my chest. "Your teeth, they're all gone." Those words hit me harder than anything ever had. That disgusting creature, perhaps even the tooth fairy, had taken every last one while I sat passed out from the drugs. What the hell was I supposed to do now? "Dentures," the doctor said, as if reading my mind. "Dentures are going to be the best option for." No, I didn't say the word as I was unable to, but a shake of my head and the look in my eyes told them all they needed to know. I wasn't wearing any dentures. I was going to get my own teeth back. I gestured for a pad of paper, my mother taking a moment or two to understand. After she did, I was handed the paper as well as a black ink pen. I wrote quickly. I wrote furiously. "I want my teeth back. Honey, I'm afraid that's just not possible. The building has no record of any DR. Willie, and even if someone were to find him," I slammed the pad of paper down and stared off through the rainy window. Watching the car speed by on the street below, tears began to come easily. Just 14 years old, and something precious had already been taken away. They offered me a mirror. I couldn't bear to look. That night when we arrived home, I was given a warm bowl of soup, the worst soup of my life, I might add. I wasn't able to chew even the smallest vegetable and survived that night on warm chicken broth and Gatorade. My mom kept insisting I settle on dentures, but I had something else planned. Before I go on, you have to understand something. I was terrified of seeing that creature again, but after I awoke from the trauma, there was another feeling as well. Hatred. I hated the thing that had done this to me. I hated that he had taken something so precious. And most of all, I hated that he had done this to so many children before. Somehow I knew what to do. After my mom and dad went to sleep, I was going to sneak out of the house and head back to the scene of the crime. Something told me that the creature that had tormented me would be there, waiting. But I had a surprise for him this time. Or so I thought. Checking my parents' room, I quietly headed back down to my own bedroom and climbed down the gutter drain. I jumped the last few feet down onto the driveway and began to jog down the center of the empty street towards the tall building. Though my parents had been under the impression that I had taken the large dose of pain medication prescribed to me by my newest doctor, I had opted to bury it under my mattress instead. The pain I felt while running down the dark street was intense and sharp, but I wanted to be sharp myself. And the acute throbbing of my jaw was like gasoline on the fire of hatred that was pushing down through my entire body. When I reached the corner of Elm Street, the first wave of fear finally took hold. Staring up at the office building, I saw that there was a single light switched on. I counted the floors, 6, 7, 8. Of course, it was the 8th floor. Still, that was why I came here, wasn't it? Taking a deep breath, I walked towards the entrance of the building. I hadn't planned far enough ahead to think about just how I would get into the building at night. As it turned out, that was a problem I need not solve. The door was wide open. I slowly stepped inside and it closed and locked behind me. There was no turning back now. There were 2 different sets of elevators, though one looked to be out of commission. There were 2 orange cones sitting in front, tied together easily with an overzealous amount of yellow caution tape. Pressing the up button to the other, I listened in the darkness to the faint hum of the machine as it glided down towards me. The door opened, and I let out an audible sigh of relief as I noted the elevator was indeed empty. Jesus, how was I going to fight this thing when I was so afraid? The door closed in front of me, and I hesitated for a moment. Before I could even gather the courage to press the button, the number 8 lit up like a Christmas tree, and the elevator began to rise. As it rose, I got as ready as I could be. I summoned whatever courage I had left. telling myself that if I didn't stand up to this creature and try to kill it, who would? The door opened to the 8th floor. But instead of being greeted to the usual lobby or waiting room, I stepped out instead into a hallway. The hallway, in fact, where I had been pushed against my will. The hallway of teeth. This time, instead of being strapped down and wheeled along the cold floor, I went willingly farther into the tunnel that yet again seemed to go down deep into the earth. Each step brought more fear than the next, and then I heard the voice. "Welcome back," it said, seeming to hold back a soft laughter. Whatever had been lighting the path before me ceased immediately, but I was prepared. I quickly pulled out a flashlight and pointed it in the direction of DR. Willie's voice. "You came prepared," he added, this time not holding back a coarse laughter. "I came to kill you," I finally replied. The words jumbled and blurred together in my current condition. I tried my best not to stammer in fear. There was silence for a moment. It did nothing to ease my terror. Before I could think of my plan of attack, a tall figure in a pink dress came twirling forward out of the darkness. I fell back in fear, and the flashlight slid across the smooth floor towards the creature. It danced towards me, faster and faster. I ran, and though the increased distance from the flashlight made it harder and harder to see the dancing creature that approached me, I could hear the soft patter of its feet as it drew closer. Without thinking, I stopped in place, closing my eyes and putting my full trust into a different sense. I listened as the creature drew closer, and I pulled out the gun I had taken from my father's closet. Please God, don't let me miss. Right before the creature reached me, I pulled the trigger. And then I pulled it again and again. I pulled it until the clip was empty, and then I collapsed onto the floor and waited for any sign of movement, or even worse, of laughter. But there was nothing. In a short time later, I walked back down towards the flashlight I had left behind. Scanning the hall carefully, I saw no sign of the creature that had pursued me. I hadn't killed it after all. I reloaded the gun quickly. Though my cell phone still works, I can't seem to find my way out of the tunnels of teeth. They seem to go only in one direction, down farther and farther into the earth. And I only have 3 bullets left. I hadn't managed to kill the creature, but I was still alive, and I still had a shot. But how the hell was I going to escape the tunnels? Perhaps I wasn't. Perhaps I was meant to die down here, as the creature had said. But maybe, just maybe, I could take that evil dentist son of a bitch with me. 3 bullets. That would have to be enough. But there was something else, too. How long will the batteries in my flashlight last? I guess 3 or 4 hours max. And if I wasn't able to kill the creature and escape by then, I suppose I'd be as good as dead. But if I could find him while the light still shone brightly, if I could find him while the meandering passages of children's teeth could be seen, maybe I could aim truer this time. Maybe I could kill it. Walking slowly around each corner, I turned the flashlight ever so cautiously, hoping I was ready for the creature to appear. Hours passed by quickly, until my watch finally froze at, you guessed it, midnight. Maybe it was my imagination, but it seemed that just as my watch hit that time, the angle of the tunnel seemed to slant even more downwards. No, not my imagination at all, I realized. It was as if the whole world I was in rotated on an axis right at that time, the path I was on now becoming almost vertical. I threw the flashlight into my bag and grabbed onto the teeth around me as strongly as I could. Though I couldn't see without the aid of a flashlight, I could feel a bottomless space below. Please God, let it keep turning. Though I had tried rock climbing a few times and had done fairly well, I could feel my hands start to tighten up and weaken. I wouldn't be able to hold on much longer, and I would soon fall. A million thoughts rushed through my mind then. Everything from my parents' reaction to losing their only son, to the curious question of will my body ever even be found down here. The muscles in my arms finally gave out completely, and I fell. I fell downwards into endless darkness. I hit the icy water hard, and for a few seconds I was sure that I was dead. But I was alive, it seemed, the liquid breaking my fall though still painful. From the acute pain on my left side, it was clear I had broken a rib or two. And from how difficult breathing had become, it wasn't altogether impossible that the fractured bone hadn't pierced my lung. Coughing as I tried desperately to stay afloat, I wondered if the warm sensation around my mouth was from the pool I swam in or produced from my own damaged lungs. I felt the sand below my feet then, and a feeling of relief as I collapsed onto the murky shore around the body of water lying there until I could breathe steadily again. I began to rise to my feet and survey the new environment. The damp air pushed down into my lungs, and though I wanted to breathe in deeply, I knew I needed to work hard to slow my breathing. Closing my eyes, I tried to picture being anywhere but where I was. Only one picture kept flashing again and again in my mind, the pink-dressed creature I had met only a day earlier. I dug my hand deep into my skin to try and dull the pain, and then I headed towards the faint light emanating from a few yards away. When I reached it, I began to understand what this place was, a tomb of sorts or a gallery, the burning fireplace directly ahead of me illuminating the vast walls and ceilings around. There were teeth as there had been in the hallways where I had fallen from, but there were bones here as well. The bones of children. Bones and teeth were woven together in murals, each one a more disturbing and terrifying scene than the next. "You made it easy on me," the voice called out from behind. I quickly turned, but it was too late, the familiar prick of a needle piercing the flesh of my neck before I could grab my father's gun. I felt my legs and arms turn into jelly, and I collapsed onto the damp sand below. I was losing consciousness quickly, but the voice still continued. "Normally, I have to carry them down here." There was a faint laughter as the creature began to dance in joy. My eyes were seeing double, but I remember the creature's arm gesturing out slowly towards a blank space on the wall. "This will be your exhibit. It's beautiful, isn't it? I'm thinking of putting your left arm where your head is now, and then stitching your teeth beautifully around your ears. The pattern will be lovely, don't you think?" You did all this?" I asked weakly. The creature stopped twirling then and cocked its head towards me as if it were a dog. "I did some of this. Remember what I told you. There are many of us." It paused for a moment. "Time to die. But don't worry. You'll live forever in a way." For the first time since it had stolen my teeth, I did something I hadn't. I smiled. I smiled wide, and with my smile came a rising laughter. I pulled out the gun, aiming it at the creature which I now saw 3 of, as whatever medication it had injected me with found its way deeper into my system. 3 bullets. 3 of you, I whispered before pulling the trigger. The creature's look was more surprise than anger as the 3rd bullet finally struck true. It fell to its knees and did something unexpected. It pulled out the teeth it had taken from me and extended its arm out in my direction. "Here, you've earned them." Getting up weakly, I reached out and took hold of what was mine. I gave one last look at the creature before beginning my journey out of the strange labyrinth. My vision was still failing and my steps wobbled, but I remember its last words clearly. "Remember to floss. Are your grandparents still alive? If they died today, would you miss them?" My own grandfather died 4 days ago, it most likely being the biggest surprise of my life. Yes, people die, but I hadn't even known of his existence until that Monday evening phone call. "John Walker." "Yeah, I'm afraid I have some bad news." The caller, my grandfather's lawyer, went on to inform me of multiple family details I hadn't known. First, I had a grandfather named William. Second, he had died by suicide, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And third, I was to be the sole beneficiary in his will, contingent on only one fulfillment. "Which is?" I asked. There was a slight hesitation on the other end before she continued. "It would be better if I explained in person. Could you come by tomorrow?" I hung up the phone and tried to get some rest before my drive through the mountains. The strange new information swirling around in my mind like glitter in a snow globe before finally falling gently to the ground below. Having been adopted as a child, I had never known any of my real family. Maybe it's better that way. Despite finding out about the life and death of a man I had never known, I slept well that night. The next morning after checking the weather forecast, I quickly replaced the front windshield wipers and headed north. While he had lived surprisingly close, all things considered, the drive would still take nearly 6 hours, and the upper part of the state was due for the first snowstorm of the year. Part of me was looking forward to seeing the area again, my last experience with a white substance being 15 or more years ago, growing up with a family that had taken me in. The drive started with rain at first, a slow plop for 5 or so minutes, and then a steady plastering of the windshield. 2 hours or so later after that, the snow began to fall. By the time I reached the lawyer's office, there was nearly 6 inches on the ground already, and I was in a bit of a rush to try and make it back downstairs before it was complete. Hello. You must be John. I'm Cindy. She would have been stunningly beautiful under any other circumstance, her dark hair falling perfectly across her face, a pair of the darkest green eyes I had ever seen staring back at me as she extended her hand forward. Hello, Cindy. I used the phrase under any other circumstance because, well, not only did the untimely death of a family member, if you could call him that, spoil the moment, the woman seemed completely devoid of any emotion, almost like a doll. It's hard to describe, and I fear I cannot do Cindy justice. Perhaps all you need to know is that there was something not quite right about my grandfather's lawyer. She was too perfect, if there is such a thing. After going over the finer details of his estate, Cindy quickly got to the caveat. It is all to be yours, the mansion in Grand Hills, his collection of old automobiles valued at $500,000, and a large property in upstate New York. It is all to be yours based on one condition. The woman paused for a moment, pretending to sort through a small stack of papers while she eyed me over. You have to send his ashes into space. Can you repeat that? Yes, he wished for you to release his remains into space. Don't worry, the details have been meticulously arranged. The woman smiled for the first time, a painfully transparent act. Physically, her smile should have been beautiful. Yet that same word seemed to jump up in my mind. Unnatural. We discussed the meticulous details for a few minutes, at the end of which she handed me a single key. It unlocks every door in his home, save for one, she said. Curious now, I asked, which door does it unlock? Her eyes met mine, and then drifted down towards the expensive tile underneath our feet. All but one, she repeated. Did I think that was odd? Yes, but part of me just wanted to get this whole thing over with. I didn't give a damn about the grandfather I never knew, the man that hadn't cared enough to ever contact me while he was alive, and I was planning on selling the property and possessions as quickly as possible. The subsequent drive was an hour or so north through a mix of country roads, mountains, and forests as far as the eye could see. It was evening when I finally passed over the bridge, a small sign to the right of it, Grand Hills. At the bridge's end, the road began to slant steeply upwards, so much so, in fact, that I could see the very tip of a mountain that stood in the very center of town. As I worked my way around the twisting roads, the snow began to fall thicker than it had been before. The weather was odd in itself, and I couldn't remember ever seeing snow fade for a few moments and then become a violent storm the next. It was almost as if Grand Hills was its own world apart from the one I'd known, but that was silly. Surely, the odd series of twisting roads and foreboding hills were to blame for the rare weather conditions that forced their way against me as I drove upwards. Jesus, how long does it take to reach the top? 27. It's almost midnight. What happened next was unlike me, to say the least, as I finally reached the top of the mountain and noted that the clock read exactly midnight. I felt a feeling of dread. I was not religious. I was not superstitious. Yet the feeling had been unmistakable. Midnight. I turned the ignition off with a click, opened the door, and set my feet onto the cold ground. It felt almost familiar, but that was impossible. It was hard to see anything in such darkness. But the top of the mountain seemed far larger than it had looked from afar. A mile in diameter. Maybe more. I would explore in the morning. For now, I just wanted to get some rest. Walking up to the old two-story home, I found the old key my grandfather's lawyer had given me and turned it clockwise until hearing a click. The door opened easily, creaking softly and showing nothing at first glance. I flicked down the phone's flashlight and stepped into the entryway. The chandelier hung far above me as I scanned the home. It seemed pristine, almost untouched. There was a large stairway leading upwards, where I had been informed there were 2 guest bedrooms, and directly ahead of me sat a long hallway to which I seemed unable to see its ending. I placed my hand on the banister and climbed upwards for the last time that evening. Opening the blue and gold door handle to the first room, I was pleased to find a comfortable enough-looking bed. The room connected to an old antique bathroom as well, with an artfully tiled floor and a cast-iron bathtub that looked as if it could survive a nuclear blast. I was too tired to explore any farther. I slept. I'm not sure how much time passed when something warm brushed up against the side of my face. I let out a scream that could have woken the dead. Luckily for me, it didn't. The dead stayed that way, for now at least. Whatever the hell it was, I swatted it quickly away from my face and jumped out the opposite side of the bed, fumbling desperately to find a switch to the lamp. I finally flicked it on and saw to my surprise, in relief, a jovial orange cat. Jesus, you scared the shit out of me. The cat's soft green eyes stared back into mine as if to say, that scared you. You ain't seen nothing yet. Walking over, I gently stroked the top of his head, to which a soft purr was my reply. After that, I got back into bed and tried to drift back to sleep. I did finally do just that, and this time I dreamt. I dreamt of a lake so still and calm that it seemed you could almost walk across it. I dreamt of the orange cat and the balloon my grandfather had demanded I do my part in sending into space. In the dream, I walked past the water and towards the bright object. In the dream, the balloon wasn't red or blue or green. It didn't have the normal happy enough design you might expect on such an object. My hand reached out towards a single silver post the balloon had been attached to by a rope. Without thinking, I untied it. Without hesitation, the object floated happily up towards a sky filled with clouds. It was then that I finally realized what had been painted on the outside of the thing. But it wasn't painted exactly, was it? There was the face of an old man, his bright blue eyes staring across the distance between us. The man grinned widely, as if pleased, as the balloon lifted farther and farther into the sky. A soft melody began to play in my mind. And then I awoke. This time to sunlight. It was morning, a beam of light passing through the foggy window and onto my face. Looking around the room groggily, the cat that had scared the life out of me earlier was nowhere to be seen. Checking the alarm clock on my phone, I was relieved to see there was still plenty of time. I got dressed, brushed my teeth, and headed downstairs. Part of me wanted to explore the house farther, but the directions had been specific. At exactly 10 o'clock, I was to untie the balloon. Heading up to the front door, I was surprised to see the vast body of water before me. It was strikingly similar to what I had seen in the dream. A chill went through me as I walked around its edges. I saw it from a distance. The bright red balloon she had spoken of. I was relieved to see that it at least was different from the dream. Heading closer, I saw that it was already floating at eye level, the only thing stopping its ascension being a white rope that was tied neatly to a stake below. It suddenly struck me just how odd of a request this in fact was. A man I had never known dying by suicide and then leaving me his entire fortune, which seemed formidable, in trade for doing one small favor after his death, releasing what I imagined was a very expensive red balloon that would carry his ashes up into the ether and perhaps beyond. And how odd also that his investment was held so haphazardly to the ground below. I figured that even a moderate amount of wind would have caused the stake to pull free from the ground, and the balloon would have been released far before I had the chance to do it myself. And why was it so important that I be the one to release his ashes anyway? I guess it didn't matter. People were crazy, and if one odd job was all I needed to do in return for such a fortune, then I would do it. The balloon itself was secured only a few feet from the rocky lake. As I placed my hand on its smooth edges, a cool breeze fell across the water, and it began to snow for the first time that morning. Light snowflakes filled the air around me, their company seeming to silence the water and top of the mountain. I knelt down, untied the rope that had only contained a single knot, and felt the balloon's weight in my hand for the first time. It was really heavy. How could it be so heavy? It wasn't large by any means, and only contained my grandfather's ashes, for God's sake. Oh God, the clock. I forgot to check the time, I realized, as the balloon pulled up violently towards the sky above. Shit, and why is the pull of this thing so fucking strong? I tried to force it back down using my body weight, acting like a dog or cat that suddenly became dead weight to avoid a bath or visit to the vet, but it was no use. A gust of wind struck the thing again, and I fell forwards into the water just ahead. I watched the red colors float quickly up through the falling snow. Higher, then higher. Checking my watch, I saw that the time was 9:44. Close enough. It was just about the time that I lost sight of the balloon that I noticed a drop of blood on my left hand. I must have cut it on the rope. And then there was a drop on my right hand, and then one on my forearm. Plop, plop. I looked back up towards the sky. Plop, plop, plop. At first I thought, no, I was sure that I was dreaming, or my eyes were just playing tricks on me. They were telling me that what was once only moments ago a fog of white falling gently from the sky was now replaced by a steady drip of dark red. It covered my arms now completely, and my vision seemed to be quickly becoming a mix of that color. This way, a familiar voice said, as I pulled my eyes from what I was sure was blood covering my entire body and up towards her voice. It was the woman from yesterday, her once dark hair now transformed into a flowing sea of red. Without saying a word, I followed her around the home and through an iron gate behind. "Patentibus," she whispered. The gate opened slowly before her. Yes, I was surely dreaming. The woman I followed through the gate was now completely cloaked in red. The sight of her was magical and terrifying all at once. Yet there was something else that drew my attention away. We were in a graveyard, I realized. Yet that was not what pulled me so. It was the names on the graves. Stephen A. Walker, born September 3, 1840, died February 6, 1907. Linda J. Walker, born January 9, 1781, died December 21, 1809. They're all here, the woman added, pausing for a moment and looking back. The entire family I had never met was buried on this mountain. We walked for a few moments more before coming to the first fresh grave I had seen. Sure enough, William F. Walker, my grandfather. What the hell is going on? The beautiful woman replied nothing, only turning to the grave and speaking one word. Consurgo. She knelt lower and kissed the tombstone sweetly. I watched in horror as the red liquid, of which I was sure was blood, began to fall more rapidly from the sky. Though terrified, I wasn't even all that surprised by that point, when a strong hand reached out from the stained grave and towards the sky above. And then another hand. The red woman extended her arms downwards and towards them. "No," I shouted. "Stop." But it was too late, the cold hands clutching on and pulling strongly. She braced her feet against the tombstone, as not to be dragged downwards into the earth herself. And that's when I saw him for the first time. William F. Walker, his stained red face popping out of the ground first, and then his torso, and then his legs. When he finally stepped up onto the ground before me, I watched as he took a deep breath and stared up at the sky. "You've done well," he said, paying no attention to the woman and instead staring at me. I fell backwards in fear, my body trembling now, and my mind coming dangerously close to snapping. The red rain fell so hard now that I began to sink down into the earth myself. I began to scream as the ghastly figure walked closer and knelt down beside me. It had to be a walker, he said, his head drifting up towards the sky and his mouth opening wide to drink. The last thing I remember was seeing my dead family claw their way up and out of the now red mud, and my grandfather's hand reaching down and taking mine. His eyes glowed a bright yellow that filled my heart with fear. Yet I was mesmerized. I stared back into them as he spoke 5 words. "We have work to do."